Yeah, I just went to the park yesterday and got crepes on the way home, which was
Oh,
nice. Nothing fascinating, but
and
it's good to
yet,
be out.
at this
Yeah.
time, in this
Yes.
sphere, what's going on now? It's something almost sublime, isn't it? I
I
Just
walk.
do
being
think
out.
it's gonna make us appreciate stuff kind of a lot more. Like today when we were walking round, we passed like numerous pubs and thought, wouldn't it be nice if you could just go in there now and just have something to eat?
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Something which you would absolutely have taken for granted 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But now the novelty of let's go in somewhere and sit and have a nice meal just would seem like an amazing thing to be able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, like
Yeah.
just like conversing with strangers as well. I mean, that's because, I don't drive, so I go everywhere by public transport, and the ability just to interact with people, which I became very used to on
Yes.
trains or in train stations and whatnot. Oh, that is something I miss. It really is something I miss. I mean, in all of its zaniness and strangeness. I mean, the amount of different types of people you meet. Obviously you meet some very 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 odd people as well. It's something I do miss, and I'm looking forward to it again, very very much.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know if there'll be like a cultural shift with regards to stuff like that, like people's willingness to interact with someone they don't know and that kind of thing.
Let's hope so. Let's sincere. I mean, one of the other things it might do is, of course, stunt our ability to do that.
Mhm.
That's also a possibility. Yeah,
I mean, we've been isolated for so long and communicating largely through this medium. Um,
yeah,
we might have
People
lost some of the ability.
people do adapt very quickly and then adapt back, though. I
Yeah.
wonder to the degree to which, I mean, I think things will be different because, I mean, there's the question mark over whether or not the virus will be entirely gone, which I guess
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
um, and also whether or not others will appear because there are structural reasons for
Of
that,
course. Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah. Of
Um,
course.
and I mean, I think public health is going to be treated very differently, at least for another 10 or so years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
impact of this is going to resonate on for a very, very long time. I mean, it's bizarre to think, but this may be one of the epoch-making events of our lives, certainly.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
think wearing
definitely.
masks and stuff in shops will, even if it's not legally mandatory, I think a
Mm.
lot more people will do that now, just as a matter of course.
Oh, yeah.
Just when you're going to be in contact with loads of people you don't know,
Well, it
and just things like
actually,
washing your hands in and out of a shop and all that. I think
right.
that kind of thing will become much more common practice.
I think so, and in many respects, it does make sense, doesn't it? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
one of the things I've certainly noticed, because of in the area that I work, it's very like working in a school. Of course, you get every vogue disease going. It's
sure,
just the way it is. You get used to it. So we prepare for the fact that every summer there's going to be a summer cold going around the house, which is probably going to
absolutely,
be
yeah,
quite nasty. We prepare for every winter there's going to be probably a flu-like bug and probably a stomach bug going around as well, and that has just been de rigueur for as long as I've been working in care. The last couple of years, every single one of us, staff and service users, since the pandemic hit, have had nothing.
yeah.
Mm.
Just because general hygiene and keeping yourself away from
Right,
stuff has just increased, hasn't it?
right. Like, not a sniffle, not a sore throat, not a slightly fluey day, nothing.
Yeah,
And it's been odd, actually. It's been very, very strange because, of course, if these things are so regular, you come to almost rely upon them as a temporal measure.
yes.
You almost determine the seasons by here's the summer cold, here's the winter vomiting virus. Yay!
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, ironically, one of those did go around one of the primary houses where I work, the Christmas before COVID hit,
Mm.
and that was very, 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 very nasty. It was very nasty indeed. But it's odd to think that because of the lack of human contact, because of course we have been wearing PPE and whatnot, because our guys, our service users, haven't been in contact with anyone really, there's been nothing.
I think people will sort of adapt some of that increased hygiene, but I do think by and large, people, like Rowan said about people adapt back, I think people will sort of snap back to normal relatively quickly. Because I don't think anyone really, apart from your conspiracy mentals, I don't think anyone really thinks this is a mass societal change. I think it's more like you've hit pause and then we'll unpause and carry on. You know, I don't think anyone actually thinks this is the way it's going to be forever.
That's a problem, though, isn't it? Because it should be a mass societal change. You know, this should be something that gives us pause and makes us look at the way we've organized society and presume civilization and change it. Because one of the things it's certainly exposed in the UK is that our systems are not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
I mean,
very strongly.
This is something that should change our perceptions of what society is, the way humanity interacts. I was doing some research into it a little while back, and, you know, there have been medical think tanks all the way back to the 1950s, and not just here, but in the US, in Europe, all over the world, that have been outlining this very scenario. Since the advent of air travel, really, of commercial air travel, the scenario of a respiratory pandemic has been almost inevitable.
Yeah.
And
sorry,
no, go on.
I was just going to say, in many ways, our adaptability both plays to our favour and disfavour, because the way that we conceive what's possible is so tethered to what is, even if we have an intellectual grasp of these ideas, you know, that these things are possible. And I remember when this was just starting to come out of China, even quite intelligent and perceptive people were saying, "Oh, it'll never hit us like it's hit other places. You know, we've got much better health infrastructure. You know, this is Britain. Right. It couldn't possibly happen here in that way." And it's tempting to just discount those people as being sort of silly, but I think it's really hard to imagine a vastly different way of being in the world until it's arrived. And then we immediately forget that there was any other way of being in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
It's totally true. I mean, I remember the exact moment where I realized that, because of course when it's just on the periphery of perception, you do think like that, don't you? It's almost like a natural human thing. It's almost like a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
I remember when it hit me that, hang on, this is actually going to be something much bigger than anybody realizes. There was a video going around from an English nurse who lived in Spain. And she'd been working as a nurse in Spain for some decades, and she put out this incredibly impassioned Twitter video where she was saying, basically, look, this thing is not what you're being told it is. You're being told in the UK that it's as bad, you know, as awful as this is. Oh, it's only terribly dangerous to the elderly and to the infirm, as you know, as eugenicist and awful as that is. But she was saying, no, that is utter nonsense. I'm working here, and we have got wards that are filled to capacity. We've got literally bodies piling up, and they're not of the elderly and the infirm. They're of young people, they're of all age groups and all demographics, you know, and she was incredibly impassioned about it because she has family here, obviously, and she was saying, look, you need to take this seriously, you need to get on to your MPs, to the people, and get them to do something, because this is going to hit you like a ton of bricks, you know. And that's when I got the cold sort of, oh fuck moment. That's when I realised that this is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. And it was still while we were being told all the usual rhetoric, you know, that, oh, it's not going to be as terrible as it seems. It's being overplayed. There was the utter tripe of herd immunity being spoken of, which I can't even. I think it stands as a measure of just how absurd our systems are, that a prime minister, any kind of any kind of representative at all was able to go on television and say that nonsense.
It's deeply disturbing, especially because of the actual eugenicist views this government is associated with special advisors who have, been forthrightly pro-eugenics ideas, and even a really bizarre speech from Boris Johnson from a short while back, where he talked about shaking a box of cornflakes and some will rise to the top and some will fall to the bottom and blah blah blah.
God.
Just like really really surreal, as we've come to expect from Bojo. But it is it was their first impulse, and they immediately tried to reinvent that, and it seems quite successfully. Like, a lot of people seem to have forgotten that that was the view.
Oh, I still talk to people who say the same thing. They say crap like, "Oh, I don't see how any other government could have done better or worse," and I'm like, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You have access to media in general. Yes, you can. I don't take them at face value, I think this is often where a lot of my compatriots and I part ways on the left, because I find a lot of them have a lot more tolerance for the nonsense, Sure. I'm like, no. Yes, you can see. Yes, you can see. You have access to media. You can see what the other countries have done and how much better they've done it. So yes, you can. I find that attitude, that willful. First of all, it's dishonest. I don't believe them. I don't think they're engaging honestly with me when they say that bullshit. I don't think they're that ignorant. But second of all, it shows you just how deep the sort of ostrich mentality is. Oh, let's just bury our head in the sand because we want things to be normal. We want things to be okay, And I want to shake these people. I just want to say, I'd scream at them. It's not okay. It's not okay. I
mean, the unpreparedness in terms of things like PPE was just incredible. Like there had been warnings directly to Theresa May that she had ignored. I don't want to sound too like I'm sort of like on an anti-Tory rant.
No, go for it.
This
is the podcast for it. It's happened a lot before.
Yes, I mean they are pretty repellent, but it's also more than that. I mean, I think there was a societal-wide problem. I would say there was a societal-wide problem with the way in which I have my politics, and British capital did really decide that it couldn't afford healthcare at the levels to which we've become accustomed for quite a long time, and discounted the possibility of a shock event like this. And I think the problem now is that they face a simultaneous crisis of both capital in terms of their own finances. I mean, they're still in debt over what happened in 2008, and at the same time, an inability, therefore, to fund a healthcare system that's sufficient to these kinds of threats in the future.
Right.
And it's a perfect storm situation. I think a lot of people who are sort of expecting everything to just sort of settle back into a pre-pandemic norm. I mean, I think in some ways it will. Obviously, the pandemic is not going to stay forever, but the ramifications, and especially the sort of health and economic ramifications and how they tie together, I think are almost impossible to predict.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the government's increasing authoritarianism in terms of like trying to ban protests, as they recently did, or finding scapegoats and going after the traveller community as they have disgracefully. I suspect that they are anticipating quite severe unrest.
I think so too. Yeah, when we get the double whammy of the COVID economic impact and Brexit as well, it's going to cause mass unrest in this country, and I mean like really powerful unrest. So the forces that basically relied upon Brexit, or that promoted Brexit in particular, are going to be looking for any excuse. They're going to be looking for any scapegoat they can.
Oh, the pandemic's a ready-made one for that.
It is, isn't it? That's the problem. I mean, for some of them, COVID came along at just the right time. Just
Yeah.
the right time. I guarantee you, some of them are kind of clicking their heels, you know?
That kind of cause and effect thing is where you get these leaps in logic about it being fake.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the fact that when 9/11 happened, a lot of people made a lot of money off it because they were like war profiteers. They're like, oh, I can take advantage of this situation.
Of course.
Just like when there's an earthquake, there's immediately a load of property developers start buying up land before they've even cleared the bodies from it.
Yeah.
Because they know that as soon as they rebuild that shit, they're going to make bank on this.
Yep, absolutely.
So that doesn't mean they caused the earthquake, but with things like 9/11 or indeed with this pandemic, you get those leaps in logic from people that because some people stand to benefit from it or because they're going to use that as an excuse to cover up something else, that must mean they faked the whole thing.
Right.
Which is just amazing to me that you get these like childlike leaps in logic from people who have otherwise grown adults.
Right.
But it's just like a cause and effect confusion that they have there, that yes, they will absolutely take advantage of this situation because there's ruthless pricks who do that. But that doesn't mean they caused it or that they faked it.
Right. It's much less. I mean, that's what's so scary, isn't it? And I think that's where that kind of narrative comes from. There is this desire for, on behalf of many, many, many people, for there to be some element of control in all of this, to be some sort of authorial factor, and often there isn't.
No.
There just isn't. It's like it's parasites taking advantage of a phenomena. Because that's what they do. That's how they operate, you know.
It can also be that constructing an understanding of something as complex as the different social forces that are vying for control over these kinds of disasters, and then the underlying roots of the economic problems, requires quite a lot of sophisticated, and I think group level thought. Like an individual isn't really capable of understanding all of this in an atomized way. And I think the atomization of society, especially in terms of the ability of people on the bottom of society, be they sort of just working class or in other ways, exploited and oppressed, their ability to form together, I think since the defeats in the 80s has been incredibly limited. And I think that's given rise in the vacuum of conspiracy theory, because no one will accept no explanation. I think we're, as a species, incapable of accepting that there's no explanation. So if there aren't sophisticated, good explanations based on structural analysis, which requires higher level organizing, then conspiracy will run riot.
Right. So even a bad explanation is preferable on a sort of visceral human level to none whatsoever.
Yeah, if the government caused this virus or that it's fake and the whole thing's just to get them more control, it's still on some level preferable to this come out of nowhere and even the richest countries in the world could do fuck all to stop it.
Right.
They're both bad, but one is somehow preferable to the other for some people.
Yeah. It's kind of terrifying in a way. It's in many, many respects, on many, many, many different levels. But
on a sorry.
So no, go on.
As I was going to say, in a rudimentary level, it's kind of like stubbing your toe on a table leg and like screaming, obscenity at it. You want something to blame. You want something.
Yeah, when your mum had smacked table when you banged your head on it when you were little. And your mum had hit it as a bit like retaliation.
Bad table, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's really interesting actually, because you see that in children, and I see that often in my work as well. There is a tendency for the people I work with to personify negativity. So if something happens that is seemingly random, like for example, if they stub their toe, or if something gets misplaced or lost or whatever, I've noticed a marked tendency for them to blame a person for it who was not involved, or to conjure a person for it. It's like it's a human inclination to personify the negative for there to be someone or something to blame, which I also believe feeds into scapegoating as well.
Yes, it does. Yeah. I can't get a job because of all those immigrants.
Right,
so,
right, exactly, yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, and that's why conspiracy just naturally goes in the trajectory of being reactionary, because if you're looking for blamable targets and you already have a society with ready-made prejudices, then the targets are pretty much obvious because they're already delineated and packaged for you. They're already there.
You never have to dig very far into any conspiracy theory before it starts becoming racist or anti-Semitic or
not very far at all. it's Yeah, and like it's the way they also demonize completely legitimate movements. So, like for example, the LGBTQ movement, the way that becomes. I mean, I don't know whether they still use the language, those who fancy themselves our opponents, but I know that certainly in the mid 2000s, the whole language of the gay agenda was everywhere. It was huge, I always used to quip that, like, I mean, I feel left out because I haven't had my pamphlet. I haven't had my manifesto on this.
Have they not sent you on any like conversion missions?
Not
or
a
anything?
Not a thing. No retreats, no literature, nothing.
You go around with that ray gun that shoots rainbows and just blast kids in the street. And got that one. Oh, I only winged him. He's by. You gotta get him on.
Oh my god, that would be a fantastic like parody comic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think that would be fantastic. Some guy with a rainbow gun.
Yeah.
I think that would be superb. But I don't even know if that particular rhetoric is still used because I don't argue with them anymore. I don't involve myself. You know?
There's no point. It's just yeah. I've had the same thing with people with the conspiracy stuff, to be honest, because like at the very start of this, there were people who sort of conspiracy fears, if you like, were sort of founded in things that are real, like we were saying earlier about the fact that government's going to use this as an excuse for bad things and wrong, or that government's going to use this to pass laws that they wanted to pass anyway, and that kind of thing. And I think, you know what, I don't disagree with that. Yeah. That's fine. But at this point, those same people who were saying that have like gone fully down the rabbit hole now.
Oh yeah.
They're like saying the virus isn't even real, and that it's got microchips in it, and the making you wear a mask is just first step of before you've all got to wear an armband or something.
Right.
It's like now you've gone fully into this now, haven't you? And even people who you used to have sort of like some degree of respect for, it's like I can't even give you that leeway anymore.
No, I do believe there was a mutual of yours and mine, Lex, in the writing community who.
I've had more than one, unfortunately.
Right. And I was so surprised at how far down that rabbit hole she went.
Well, there's a few people where I thought, no, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in that because I understand they've had bad dealings with the government because of this or the other, and I think, yeah, fair enough. But then once it goes on to full on, it's all a con, there's no virus at all, really. And I'm like, sorry. The point where I had to block one of them, I'll not say who he was, but is where he was saying on a thread that there isn't even a virus, it doesn't exist at all. I said, I actually had it.
Yes, right. You've had it, haven't you?
Like, you didn't. You just had a flu, and it's like you're honestly telling me that I don't know the difference between what I suffered with for 3 weeks, and it's like, no, you do not get to tell me that I did not have this illness that I had. You know, that's it. Now that's it. You're done. I'm done with this. Yeah. This conversation is finished. You know, that was the line for me with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me it's when it crosses over into like dangerous territory, when it becomes fully blown anti-vax, you know.
Yeah.
I just don't have the patience for it.
No, it's negative enough. It's hard enough for everyone going through this at the moment. You can't see your friends and family. You can't all the things that we do that make our lives happy and joyous and kind of worth living, if you like, have largely been cut off from us from a couple of years. We're all just kind of plodding along and just enduring until we can get back to the point where we can do all these things that make us happy.
Right.
You don't want all of that bullshit added on top of
it.
That's not even real. It's just, no, we don't need this right now.
I mean,
and you can put up with it normally, like when you're going through
Yeah.
your normal day-to-day life and it's fine and you're doing your happy things, and then some idiot's on there saying that the moon landing were fake, you just can
Yeah,
kind of
you just
roll
sort
your eyes and
of,
go,
yeah,
right,
just
whatever.
throw up your eyes and just go, oh, whatever,
But
whatever.
it's not the time now, though. My
No.
tolerance for it is just not there at the moment.
No, and I fully understand anyone at the moment who feels the need to shield themselves from this thing, even though, there are fights to be had. That's definitely true. There are things that definitely need standing up for and against at the moment. But for those who can't right now, I fully get it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got quite a high tolerance for this kind of thing. I really do. I find it quite easy to just shrug it off and say, whatever, I don't care. But there have been areas certainly where it's just been nope.
Yeah.
Nope, not at the moment. I don't have the time for that. Thank you.
Yeah, same. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I mean, you have to delineate these things, because if you end up sort of sucked into it, then it just becomes all-consuming, because they have an endless chain of reasoning. There's something that I can't remember his name now. It's gonna come to me much later. But
later in the podcast.
Writer, Chesterton, J.K. Chesterton, who I occasionally read. He's sort of the reactionary I occasionally read, but he does say some smart things. And one of them is that the problem with madness isn't a lack of reason. People who have experienced some kind of loss of a capacity to think clearly don't lack reasons. They have a superabundance of them.
Yeah.
They have reasons for everything. They have reasons for why they have to, do particular rituals, why they believe particular things. And if you ever talk to somebody in one of those conditions, you're not going to find any absence of reason. You're going to find a reason for every minutia of action and belief.
It's beyond true. That I would say is an absolutism. I think that is absolutely true. I mean, the example I would throw up are the log cabin Republicans. So the gay guys who, almost universally guys, by the way, it's almost an entirely male movement. I cannot even think off the top of my head of a female member of the Log Cabin Republicans. But they are gay guys who are fervently right-wing and fervently Republican. And I've spoken with a few of them in the past when I used to argue with such people. And they are the very manifestation of what you just described there. They are these writhing, contorted, agonized masses, it's like psychological knots of justification and rationalization, where they have tied everything they are into these excruciating tangles, trying to justify why they support a movement that is ideologically opposed to their existence.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I remember talking with them, and the impression I always came away from is not anger. That would have been too easy. It was always sorrow. It was always profound sorrow, because these are people who have internalized a narrative, a kind of slave mentality, where they have internalized the narrative that they are inferior. They are inherently flawed and inferior, and what they're doing is somehow they are sacrificing their own status and their own humanity in favor of some wider societal good. There's almost like a mythologization that occurs, and it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
I think there is something inherently tragic about, there's kind of two categories really, but those who belong to a group of the oppressed who sort of side with their own oppression for whatever reason. And you get obviously some who are just grifters.
Yep.
They see a quick butt in it, and there's no real edifice to it at all. No. They don't believe anything they say. But if you're willing to sell out people like you, then you will get the attention, you will get the money.
Yeah.
And obviously there's some people with no ethical compulsions at all who can just stomach that. But in the majority cases, I think that tragedy you describe is very true. You see that amongst the sort of tiny number of trans people who are willing to endorse the myth of gender ideology and all of that nonsense. And there's a real feeling of self-hate there.
Yeah, there was
And
a fairly prominent sort of YouTuber who is a trans woman who was in the military and who fervently supports Trump throughout the entire run of Trump's campaign, fervently supported him.
I, I saw one of those people recently. I won't name names for
Yeah, of
obvious
course.
reasons, but on a video with some very far right people, and one of the people there, a woman on that call, who's just an active fascist,
Yeah.
just spent about 5 minutes talking about how this transgender person is degenerate and how she doesn't know why she's on a call with this person even if they are right wing, and then the trans woman responded just nodding along and saying, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean," blah blah. And it's just incredible that anyone can tolerate that level of denigration of who they are.
Right. It's
and then just
it's incredible to me because it's not a capacity I have. That's for damn sure, and it's one that is lessened as time has gone on, to the point whereby I won't argue with them now. I won't even engage. It's my attitude is you don't get to talk to me. You don't get a place at the table. It's none of your business. You don't get to talk to me about my relationships unless I invite you to, and that's the end of it because you know nothing about them. That's my attitude towards the whole thing, and if I'm feeling less polite, then it's a very ferocious fuck off, which I have told people to do in the past, especially those who demand the platform. That's the most amazing thing I find certainly from the right, is that they think you are obliged to talk to them.
Yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of people. Yeah,
it's incredible. They will demand that you talk to them, and it's like, no. One of the things that I guarantee will hit them hardest is if you just say, no, I won't.
And some in the centre like to sell this slightly different myth, although it amounts to the same thing, that if you're not willing to talk to these people with prejudices, you're confining yourself to a quote unquote echo chamber or some nonsense like that, as if you could possibly avoid hearing these views just being alive. Like you could actually, if I could find this mythic echo chamber and just never encounter these views, I would be very tempted.
I would be so happy. Yeah, I mean, well, I'm 37 now, and I've never found this mythical echo chamber. All I've had all my life is heteronormative, cisnormative propaganda, Now, don't get me wrong, it's not... It's for me personally, it's not that much of an issue because my insulating mechanism is go fuck yourself. I don't care. I'm going to do whatever I like. But the notion, it's something that does come from people who consider themselves to be on the centre all the time. They will talk to you as though you are the intolerant one. They will talk to you as though you are obliged to sit down with people who want you dead. And that is the core, the concision of it, ultimately, that I throw at them. I don't have to talk to people who want me dead, no matter how politely they state it.
I mean, a lot of those people just simply don't accept the truth of these views, and I mean, I think that's true across the board, because not having come from any of the communities being targeted or even being adjacent to them, they just hear a different thing when these prejudiced people talk. I mean, you see this. You should see this, around the whole of LGBT, but you can also see it around how, racial prejudices work, how disability prejudices operate as well. That, bigots are very good at presenting their views as if they're reasonable and centre ground. And, code, within the trans issue, of course, protecting women's spaces just sounds inherently reasonable without really knowing what that actually implies, what that actually means. And yeah, people just hear different things, and then when they hear, you saying, "I will not talk to this person who
Right.
says this thing," they perceive you as being just completely over the top and
Right.
hyperbolic and ultra sensitive.
Oh
And
yes, that is something that I've definitely had aimed at me. That it's that somehow, but it's ironic, isn't it? They will not wag the same finger or aim the same condemnations at those we are saying they are saying we're being intolerant of, even when they are saying we should die. They
well,
clam up. They clam up. They become completely silent. It's incredible.
because we're not talking in code,
Mm-hmm.
and so we'll forthrightly say what we think of these people, and so to the completely untrained ear, it sounds like we're being the aggressors,
Right.
because the fascists are very good at talking
Yeah.
in coded language.
That's
It's why you get bullshit like the people on the right wing, like you see this in politics, always like dress really smart and wear their nice suit and tie and everything. So your mums are thinking, oh, look how they look smart. And then someone who's on the left wing might turn up looking a bit scruffier and that kind of thing, as if that actually matters. But the right wing kind of know that to some people it does fool them into thinking that they must be the good guys because look how nicely they're dressed and and it's like politeness, as if you're the one talking politely and calmly and using proper language, and the other guy shouting and swearing and being aggressive, he must be the bad guy.
Right.
The fact that you're saying, I think this guy should go to the gas chamber because he's gay, and he's saying he's objecting to that quite passionately.
Yeah.
People ignore that and just focus on the fact that he's shouting and swearing and he's dressed in a nice suit and speaking all calm and polite. And it kind of fools people into not paying attention to what's being said.
That's exactly it.
The way they're saying, and that as someone who is kind of othered from society because I'm autistic, this whole culture of it's the way you said things that infuriates me anyway, because I don't have that.
Right.
I only focus on what people are saying. I don't do subtext. I don't do none of that. I listen to exactly what it is that they're saying.
Yeah.
I don't care how it's being put forward. I'm listening to the words.
So you extrapolate to like the ultimate conclusion, which is a really good tactic. That's what you really, because what Rowan was saying is absolutely true. They utilize coded language all the time because they know they can't say we think these demographics should die.
We can't actually say that. No, but
that's the extrapolation. That's the extrapolation. When you've got people, you've got Boris Johnson saying, "Oh, the virus is only going to affect the elderly and the infirm." That's eugenicist language. That's barely coded, but that's the level we're at.
But that's the other thing as well. They constantly test how far they can go with dropping the code.
They do.
We saw this with the recent report on race in the UK, and I think they've overstepped there, and they're now quickly backing down because the media was not willing to back them up. The media, even some of the right-wing media, were like, "No, you can't say this. We're not there yet. At the very least."
Right.
I'm sure some of that right-wing press would love to be there.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. But one of the ways in which they overplayed their hand this time is just purely legally. So they've actually claimed that certain prominent historians who are from ethnic minorities contributed to this report when they didn't. And those historians have come forward and said, no, we're cited in this report and we didn't contribute a word to it. But we're going to our lawyers now, obviously.
They're incredibly duplicitous, but at the same time, they have very little to risk in just constantly testing the ground. And that's where they overstep, because they're just trying constantly. I mean, an organization that does this in a horrifically masterful way, with bringing up autism. I mean, Autism Speaks is just incredibly adept at playing to the crowd in terms of spreading myths around autism and attempting to obviously put autistic people more and more into the control of often abusive families and health institutions. And they're very good at it. I mean, they're very good at presenting a public face of being caring, charitable, concerned,
Mm-hmm.
etc., etc. And you have to dig into it to actually
Yeah.
see that beneath that, there's this deep vein of eugenicism,
Yep.
of pathological control, and just outright hate. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the videos from the 90s are just shocking in terms
Yeah.
of what they actually say. And of course the other thing is, of course, if you're in the targeted group, it's exhausting, whereas obviously coming up with bullshit from the outside is relatively easy, especially if you have no moral compunction about it. So it drains people down. It's designed to do that as well.
It's absolutely true. It's one of the great strengths of the right. It's that not caring. It's a superpower. If you don't care about truth, if you don't care about ethics, if you actually don't care about any kind of rigor at all, and all you're doing is chancing the entire time, you're throwing as much shit as possible at the wall. You are just joyously and rhapsodically pissing into the well of truth constantly. It doesn't matter, does it? You can just keep doing it, And it's absolutely, and it is exhausting. It's totally exhausting. Again, it's one of the reasons why I've kind of bowed out of a lot of those discussions.
I mean, that's the best thing to do when there's nothing to be gained, because I think when you're dealing with sophists, you can't treat them as intellectually honest without giving them all the ammunition they need to win.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've ever really sorted out as a species how to deal with the fact that some people are just comfortable with untruth, with just abandoning reason.
I don't have to deal with that. I've spoken with George about this many times on the podcast and personally, but for me, again, as an autistic person, everything I do is based on what I know to be true. Everything I say is what I actually think. I don't do this thing where I'm thinking one thing but I say something else, or everything is about truth. So when I'm faced with people who base their decisions and their reality on stuff that is so easily disprovable bullshit, I don't know how to process that.
Yeah.
I really struggle with people who base their decisions and like a classic example of this in recent years is talking to people who support Brexit.
Right.
Every reason you have for that is easily disprovable, and yet you won't hear that. It's like you are literally putting your fingers in your ears and just singing to not hear these truths, and yet you insist that this is still going to be beneficial, despite every fact suggesting that is not the case. You still insist this, and I just tap out there because I don't know what to do there. It's like you say, how many fingers are you holding up? And I say 5, and I'm showing you that I'm holding 5, and you say, well, actually, I believe that it's 3.
Yeah.
Well, it's not.
It's
5.
not. Yeah.
It's 5. I've got nothing else to give.
Yeah.
It's 5. That's the end of it. I've got nothing else to say. If you still insist that it isn't, I'm done, because I don't know what else to say to you. I don't know how to talk to these people.
It's a very clever tactic as well. It can be used duplicitously and consciously, It's that muddying of the waters. I mean, homophobes do it all the time. They do it all the time. So if they see, what they will do is they will throw out one of the rote arguments that has probably been disproven 1,000,000 times. Yeah. And if they see that you can get past that, then they'll move the goalpost. They'll move it very subtly around to something else. Then they'll throw something else out. Then they'll, but what about this? But what about that? And they will not actually engage on any of the subjects they themselves have brought up at all.
Yeah, I can't argue like that. I've got to stay on the road that we're actually talking about and deal with facts. Yeah. So when these people who can just spontaneously bullshit like that, I'm never going to win an argument with them, because I'm like, well, I thought we were talking about this and now you're talking about that.
It's a superpower.
I don't know what to do. Yeah.
It's a sincere superpower, especially in the arena of politics as it currently stands.
Absolutely. That's how you end up with people like Nigel Farage.
Exactly
this as wealthy as any other politician from the same background, and yet he's somehow become the champion of the working class. You think, how is this possible?
Right. I cannot fathom it. It is something I find very, very difficult to argue with people about, because my patience and tolerance for it is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
I mean, the British establishment has been so successful at reconceptualizing class as about sort of regional identity, and of course intimate to that is often racial ideas and also generational ideas. The idea that being working class is having worked in certain jobs that are no longer either existent or common,
right.
Irrespective of who you actually are. I mean, we have the absurd situation where a delivery driver who's got, blue dyed hair and a humanities degree isn't working class, despite obviously being super exploited.
Right.
While, an ex-miner who actually now owns several large properties and rents them out at grotesque prices and does nothing for a living because, they once worked down in the pits is eternally working class.
Yes, yeah.
I've got a friend who people consider, all people who know him just generally think of him as working class because he grew up in a council house and he's a plumber, but he earns about 3 times what I do.
Yeah.
And yet people think, and he has, much bigger house, fancier car. By every margin, you would consider him to be like upper middle class. And yet, because of the nature of the job that he does, people think that it's just such bizarre. I don't understand the categorization of this anymore. It's based on systems that haven't made sense for about 5 decades. It's ridiculous. I don't even understand why it's a thing. Why does it even matter?
I think it's 2 points removed from what class actually is, because class isn't even an identity. Class is it's dependent on a certain relationship to economy, I would say. Obviously, if you're exploited, if you're dependent on your salary to reproduce your life, then you're working class in the sense that you're a worker. But class isn't how it was originally conceived. Was seen in terms of political agency.
Yeah.
And it was about people who were workers, who were exploited, coming together to improve their conditions or completely overcome their conditions. And that has completely gone. So it's reducing class to an identity, and then a particularly static and moribund identity at that, because even most identities have some notion of agency and fluidity to them.
Right.
And it's and I think it's I don't want to sound conspiratorial because the degree to which it's deliberate is complicated, but I think it's intimately bound with the right-wing reactionary culture war project that's been running since Thatcher and Reagan.
Totally so.
And it's sort of completely changed the territory. The idea that someone like Nigel Farage could be regarded as a champion of the working class, I think, would have been unthinkable when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And now it's just a matter of aesthetics, which is ultimately what the right wing is good at.
It's what it thrives on, isn't it? And because we now operate in systems that are comprised entirely of aesthetics and indeed nothing else, that's why they thrive,
And it's really hard to see a route out without you end up in a chicken and egg problem, without people coming together to actually explore their material condition, their actual situation in society as it is, and with a sense of agency thrown in. It's hard to displace this mythic version of things like class that has sort of seeped into the cracks. And so you've got this, this tension where you sort of need to overcome this sort of culture war idea of class in order to form a sort of class organization that can actually think about these issues again coherently. But at the same time, you can't do that until you've already overcome. And and obviously, society is dynamic, and that opens up opportunities. But it is an incredibly bad situation, and I think we do live in a society now that I think is largely under the control of sophists.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's it leaves us in a situation where it's very difficult to conceive of the root or the mechanism. I think that's part of the problem. When you are in this position, as we currently are, it's very difficult to determine what the path out is, or even how to begin. Where do you start on this project?
I mean, you sort of see upsurges of real, genuine agency. The protests that have been going on against quite authoritarian bill recently, but it is tricky, and it, you know, I don't think in my lifetime there's really been a massive victory for people from, you know, below in any significant way. I mean, like maybe the last one in Britain was the poll tax riot and sort of displacing Thatcher.
Of course.
But that's pretty far back, and it didn't have much continuity. So it is a really it's not a good situation, and you throw things like COVID into it, and then it's not a surprise that, given the situation, people look to things like conspiracy, you know, like blaming some outsider group for their predicament.
Right. Anywho, my loves, we do have a theme this evening.
Yes.
We do, after that lengthy prelude. We do have a theme this evening, which I believe Lex came up with, yeah? So what is it that we're going to be having a bit of a chat about this evening, Lex? Barring, of course, everything that we just discussed.
I like to have a lead in, though, because it means you're not going into the topic cold, so you're already kind of chatting. And, I prefer that.
You know how this works. We don't do the just sort of launching in here. People must tune in thinking. They must understand that when an episode of Strange Playgrounds goes up, right, okay, it says this is the topic. That means for the first 2 hours it's not going to be.
So like when you used to go to watch a film in 40s, you'd get there eventually, but you're going to have a few cartoons and serials and an episode of Flash Gordon before you get to it.
Exactly. I like to think of it as little bonuses.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a brand, that's what it is. It's a brand and a style, and I shall not deviate.
Everyone, the initial conversation always needs to end with like the planet blowing up and you don't know if we've survived it, and then next week you'll find out. And then he's like the old serial.
So going down the sort of Flash Gordon route, yeah?
And then in the next one, it actually hasn't even blown up when it cuts off. I used to love that. That's amazing. The really bad edits. It's like, hang on, I'm sure this blew up.
I'm a child of the 1980s. I remember very, very well that our cartoons used to do that shit all the time. All the time.
That actually leads into the topic, which is that what is the first, or sort of collective first, if there's more than one, proper horror film that you remember seeing as a child, either when you were too young or old enough.
Jeez.
So not something like what's basically a kid's film with horror elements, such as Gremlins, like we spoke about before, but I mean like an actual
like
horror
an adult,
film
a horror film that's aimed at an adult, yeah?
Yeah.
Stripes.
I can start with mine if you want.
Yeah, go for it, because that is a really tricky one.
As I've mentioned a few times on this podcast, I had a friend who was a couple of years older than me, whose parents didn't care what he was doing.
Right.
So he was the kid through which I would often see things on video
that
which
you maybe weren't meant to see, yeah?
Yeah. So I remember seeing at his house. I remember seeing clips of a few horror films before I ever actually watched my first proper one.
Right.
I very distinctly remember seeing some scenes from Nightmare on Elm Street, very early, which I believe was the first one. The scene I have in mind is when he's chasing one of the girls through like a red lit boiler room.
Is that the one where his arms are extended and he's sort of scraping?
Yeah, you can see him sort of scratching the glove along the wall and the sparks. And I very, very clearly remember that. I knew nothing about the franchise. I didn't know anything about who this character was. But that imagery is very clear in my mind of sitting in his living room and watching that.
Right.
Similarly, I remember seeing scenes from the first Terminator film, which is much more horror based.
Very much so.
And I also remember seeing some from Alien as well. Like I remember seeing the chestburster scene. I specifically remember that. I think he was one of those kids who would like have tapes wound back to a specific point because
he liked the particular scenes.
Yeah, I think he was one of them.
Right. So he obsessed over like some of the nastier moments in these films.
I think so. But also one which is very vivid in my mind is Fright Night. I remember some of the scenes from that because I didn't know what film it was for many, many years. You know where you've got a scene in your head or a few scenes and you can remember them vividly, but you've got no idea what film they're from. And then years later, you watch this film and that scene comes up.
Yeah.
This is what it was. And it was some of the sort of like the werewolf transformation scenes with the kid. Because I just thought it must have been a werewolf film. because to have such a vivid and kind of well put together werewolf transformation scene, you wouldn't immediately think it were going to be in a vampire movie.
Right.
So you kind of, I just had it in my head that must have been American Werewolf in London or something. You know, it was only years later that I watched Fright Night and saw this scene.
Did you ever like have that bizarre moment of paranoia where you were like, I have this image in my head and I seem to recall seeing it on television or in a film or whatever, but I'm not sure it was real?
Oh yeah, I definitely had that with the Fright Night one, because like both Freddy Krueger and the Alien stuff and the Terminator stuff are so heavily referenced in pop culture that I probably saw those things referenced in The Simpsons or whatever else multiple times before I saw the film, which kind of confirmed that it was real.
Yeah.
Whereas Fright Night is a much more obscure one.
Yeah, of course.
And it's not something that was, even now, I don't think particularly referenced in films or anything like that. Although, it does always stand in my mind as one of those films that you kind of think, do vampires not exist in this world that this film takes place in? Do vampire movies not exist? It's one of those things I think, you know, like, oh, there's a guy moved in next door. He only comes out at night. He's blacked out all his windows. He don't like garlic. And you think, I wonder what could be going on here. You know, you think, do these people not have? Did the Dracula novel not get published in this universe?
Right. So it's a universe where vampire lore just hasn't entered into popular culture at all.
I always think that about things, but all of those were kind of tidbits. The first actual proper full-on start to finish horror movie that I remember watching was with my granddad, who introduced me to a great many horror things, because he was and it was The Gate.
Oh my god! So pure encapsulated 1980s in a film.
Yeah. It's which I have actually watched a couple of years ago, actually, just to sort of refresh myself on it, because I hadn't seen it since childhood, and it's actually better than I thought it would.
Quite good, isn't it?
It's got a strange mythology. If anyone hasn't seen The Gate, it's from that era, just at the start of the 80s, where they were still using stop motion.
Yeah.
Before they'd moved full on into like puppetry, like you get in The Thing and that kind of stuff. But it's basically this family digs up a tree in their back garden, beneath which there is like the entrance to this kingdom populated by goblins and various other sort of semi-supernatural creatures.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, and then they come out and basically infest the house. But there's like little goblins, big goblins. There's a giant one that comes up out of the floor. And then there's like a zombie that's made out of tiny goblins. And when you smash him up...
It's tied into a very particular 1980s cultural paranoia as well, isn't it? That whole notion of like old rock and roll LPs, if you play them backwards, they contain occult or satanic messages.
It's very early in the satanic panic thing of it. Your kids getting all of occult knowledge and doing stuff, but what I can't remember about the end of the film is that, because something that I find quite odd in some 80s films, Gremlins is an example of this, 80s horror film, sorry, but so is Poltergeist very strongly, is traditionally a lot of horror films end with that question mark of, is anyone else ever going to believe this person?
Yes.
You know, I think, like, to me, the masterful horror film is when that person is going to go back to their life and 3 weeks later they're going to start questioning whether that ever happened or not. Because the impact on their life is, there's no physical remnant of it, you know?
Right.
But like with the Poltergeist, the fucking house is gone.
You
know what I mean?
It's hard to deny, isn't it, in Poltergeist?
Walk down the street and the entire house is gone from the foundation.
Well, the entire street saw the house like collapse in on itself in an occult kind of implosion, you know?
Right. So there's no getting away from the fact that happened, which I think would make it easier psychologically to get over it.
Well, at least you would know, wouldn't you? You would know this is absolute. You know, this is not ambiguous. There was definitely a supernatural force that harassed us and stole our children and did all sorts of weird and wacky things to us.
There's no getting away from it because you've got the physical evidence there, and there was witnesses quite to that. There are witnesses. Now, at the end of the gate, they summon the giant one comes up, the giant demon father, whatever it is, and it literally smashes up through the house, right up through all the floors of the house, leaving a huge hole all the way up.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? Like the stop motion monster,
Real
the creature is. It's incredible.
I don't know if it is Ray Harryhausen, but it's certainly from his school of sort of inspiration. Isn't it?
Very much so.
I don't know if that damage gets reversed or if it's just there once they deal with the monsters.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Which is what makes me think that, like, that's... Because, like, with another example of, like, an 80s film or 80s story, rather, involving kids dealing with the supernatural, the classic one is It.
Of course,
but because there's no physical remnant of that, you actually see that when these kids have grown up, some of them don't even remember it.
Right,
because it kind of becomes that thing of, just like you said about remembering those scenes from films, you kind of think, did that happen? Or did I imagine that? Did we actually fight a demon clown in the sewers? Or whereas with the gate, you've got this gaping hole in the ass.
Right, I mean, those creatures cause incredible devastation, don't they? So unless there's some sort of like magical reverse switch, you know, when you defeat the demon, everything goes back to normal.
That's my point. Is or not, I can't remember, and they might be. I don't know.
I can't remember, because I do know a lot of the... It's an unusual film in many respects, because it is properly horrific. You know, there are proper horror moments in it. But it's also... It's got that 1980s sort of gallows humour thing going on. It's very funny at times. But the horror is often happening to children.
Yeah.
Like, the children are the main focus, which is something that happens a lot in horror films of that era.
Yes.
And that makes it worse in many respects. And it's funny you should mention The Gate, because... It's one of... I don't know whether it was one of the first horror films I ever saw, but it was definitely one of the images from that film that has been in my mind for the longest time. And just like you said, Lex, it was one of those images which I didn't know was part of that film. I just know that I saw it at one time, and it took a long time before I realised it was from The Gate. It's after the big demon picks up the kid by the hand.
Yeah.
And when he looks at his hand, there's an eyeball in the centre of it.
Oh, yes, he kind of infects him, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's this weird, surreal image, and probably explains a lot about me and my writing, by the way. But I recall that image being in my mind as a child for a lot, and I'm not being able to understand where it came from until I saw the film again.
I remember that image. Yeah, very quite. I remember it being quite well done as well.
Really well done. It's a very good effect. I mean, essentially, I know how they do it now. It's like it's two images superimposed over one another, but done really well.
Now, apparently there is a sequel to The Game, but I've never watched it, and I believe that it's one of those where it's barely got anything to do with it, but it's just kind of called that so they can. Do you know what I mean? So
was it a case of like the studio, like, there's an established audience for this, let's just slap the name The Gate on it?
Exactly. And I think it's basically one of the goblins things survives, which some kid then takes as a pet, and then a load of other stuff happens, which has got nothing to do with any of that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like the opening 10 minutes follows on from it.
Right.
It moves into something that's got nothing to do with that gate or the tree or the record played backwards or anything like that. I think it's one of them. Basically.
Very common in the VHS era. Very common.
Yeah.
I mean, even late into the VHS era. I mean, have you guys ever seen the sequel to the Blair Witch Project?
I haven't seen it. I've heard it's very bad.
Which one?
The Book of Shadows.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Just execrable. I mean, just like...
It's got nothing to do with the Blair Witch.
Well, it's clear that this is a script or a project that whoever created or distributed it had already.
It's like an early version of the Cloverfield films, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where it's like, someone's made a horror film, let's call it Clover something so we can pretend it's part of this, but it's actually not.
Exactly that.
It's that.
The Blair Witch Project is really popular. It's incredibly hot at the moment. Let's just call this the Blair Witch Project 2. it's execrable. I mean, it is totally execrable, and it tries to do all of these weird format things where like you have to reverse the video to see some of the ghosts in the background or whatever, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think that's quite a clever idea.
Yeah.
It's just that it's so ham-fisted and so badly implemented that it just doesn't work, you know?
That's the problem with gimmicks generally, though, because people who do them come to rest on them entirely and just not care about anything else.
Yeah, it's the M. Night Shyamalan effect, you know,
Yes.
where everything relies upon the twist. The twist in big capital letters.
I've always said this about Sixth Sense, and people often don't agree with me until they try it out. Watch that film now, knowing the ending, it's actually a bit crap.
I never liked it.
The twist is just such a good twist, which it is. It is a good twist. I'm not knocking that. When you don't know it, that you come out thinking, "Oh, that was an amazing film," because the twist filled you with such sort of energy. But if you go in knowing that twist and just watch it as a film without just the big twist, it's very boring. It's very stilted. The acting's a bit wooden. It's not particularly scary. It's not particularly interesting. It's just kind of, all right.
Yeah.
You know, and the twist fools you into thinking that it's a good film.
Exactly, and I think that happened on a mass cultural level, you know? I remember The Sixth Sense so well because it came out in this country like within months, maybe within weeks of the Blair Witch Project, and the advertising campaign over here was scarier than the Blair Witch Project. Now, I'd gone to see the Blair Witch Project at the cinema, and it must have been one of the first proper horror films I saw at the cinema, so it was amazing. Not only because of the qualities innate to the film, which I've rewatched it a million times since, and I love it. It's one of my favourite horror films ever made. So when that was the tagline for The Sixth Sense, you know, and bear in mind this was at the beginning of M. Night Shyamalan's oeuvre, so nobody knew what he was like at that point. Me and my friends went to see The Sixth Sense, and we were really excited. We were like, oh wow, this is going to be amazing. And I distinctly remember the atmosphere when we came out. There was this like shiftily looking at one another, trying to gauge one another's responses, and one of us said, "That was a bit shit, wasn't it?" And I was like, yeah.
The problem with his twists generally, though, is that outside of they're foreshadowed in a very clunky way. So it's not like clever that you can very rarely actually anticipate them until you already know.
Right.
They're not like contrast it, for example, with Fight Club, where the way in which the twist of that film, and I've got issues with Fight Club too, although it has a lot of virtues, but the way that the twist in that film is foreshadowed, you could work it out. It's and then it's entertaining to go back and actually see how you could work it out. Whereas if you go back on a film like like any of M. Night Shyamalan's films, in fact,
pretty much,
you're not actually seeing that like woven tapestry of clues. You're just actually seeing how much in contempt he holds his audience.
Exactly that. Yep. This is not Arthur Conan Doyle, is it? You know, this is not a classic Sherlock Holmes story, you know.
No, it's not. No.
The only film of his that I can think is maybe a little different is possibly Unbreakable, because it doesn't really rest so much on its twist ending. Its twist ending is kind of throwaway anyway. Somebody who's quite obviously the villain is the villain. And it's more a character study, which is interesting because there's hints of that in his other films, and I think he kind of wants to be that director who does these interesting character study horrors, and yet for some reason he's just become absolutely fixated on these like Goosebump style twist endings that we've all decided collectively are good.
Yeah, the formula is very overt in most of M. Night Shyamalan's films, isn't it? I mean, for me, the apex of those films, and it's the apex in the sense that it's simultaneously the worst but also the best because it's hilarious, is The Happening.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's so funny. It's so...
I think I skipped it.
Oh, honestly, it's so ridiculous. It's remarkably funny. it's absurd from the get-go. You've got Marky Mark trying to pretend to be an academic. That doesn't work. No matter how many sweater vests he wears, it doesn't work. The
He just looks
twist is
permanently confused
he
in
does.
every role he's ever in. So
Yeah.
it doesn't work having him as an academic.
It really doesn't. Unless there are explosions going off behind him and gunfights, it doesn't really work for me. But the twist is ludicrous in that film, and it's so ludicrous that when you first encounter it, you can't pass it.
What was the twist in that one?
So basically, the film starts where there are these spontaneous suicides that happen across the world.
Like mass suicides.
Like mass spontaneous suicides that are happening across the world, and everyone's puzzled. It leads to a kind of apocalypse, and everything is breaking down. Nobody knows what's happening, and it's it's the plants.
Oh, it's trees, isn't it?
It's
yes,
trees.
It's trees.
Yeah, the plants and the trees are putting out some sort of chemical agent as a kind of reaction to the virus of humanity, which is causing us to commit suicide en masse. And there are great moments that are so funny of Marky Mark staring at houseplants and trees in this very frightened way, and it's brilliant. Honestly, it is
that concept of nature trying to kind of reassess the balance by making its pollen and stuff poisonous to you. Wouldn't it have made more sense and been more credible if it just killed you? Rather than making you kill yourself. So suddenly it gave you like respiratory failure or something. Wouldn't
something
that
like
make
that,
so much more sense?
It's not a bad idea. I mean, the concept is not terrible. It's the framing and the portrayal of it,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been done before. You've got like the whole Day of the Triffids thing.
Yeah.
It's been done many times before. But I just love the way Shyamalan takes this film so seriously, and the way the film itself takes itself so po-faced seriously with no concept of how funny it actually is.
Yeah.
Even that title is it's simultaneously terrible and a brilliant encapsulation of all of his movies, because you could almost you could almost have that as the tagline for his entire directorial career.
Right.
Something is going on.
Something is going on. Yeah. It's like I mean, when I watch it now, I have to forcibly put myself back in the context of when it was originally at the cinema and how it was originally advertised, because it would be so easy to take this film as the Commando equivalent. Have you ever seen Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah.
That is like the greatest parody of 1980s action films, and particularly Arnold Schwarzenegger films I have ever seen in my life. It's subtle, it plays it completely straight, but it is totally a satire. It's really funny. It's got all the tropes, it's got all of the cliches, and it exaggerates them to the nth degree, but it plays it straight. It is absolutely brilliant. And so I could so easily see someone seeing The Happening and thinking, well, this is a self-satire. This is a parody of his own work. It's not. It was meant completely sincerely.
Yeah. It's very bizarre to watch it because you can't even really have fun with it.
No,
it's not even like enjoyably bad. It's just bad.
It's just a terrible film, isn't it? It's a terrible film,
Strange casting choices and everything about it, it's...
The framing is weird, the tone, like the rhythm of the story is very, very strange.
It kind of... Everything I mean, I've enjoyed some of his films, I really have, but I can't shake the feeling from him that it's like when you read a poem or something by like some 18-year-old philosophy student who thinks that like he's the next Byron, and you think you can't see this the way everyone else sees it, can you? One of them who's like got a load of self-made affectations, like he carries an umbrella around even though it's sunny. It's that kind of kid, and that's just all of Shyamalan's work just feel like that to me. Like he thinks it's far smarter than everyone else does.
Yeah.
What's the one with the guy with multiple personalities? Because I feel like that one encapsulates that quite well.
Split, yes.
And that film despite being really just like slasher trash, like the whole film is just garbage, really. Like it doesn't engage with any of its ideas especially well. It's got a very good lead actor who really puts his all into ridiculous part, and he does really well with that. Like, aside from all of the other issues, but the film thinks it's saying something profound about human psychology, and that's really clear from all of these really earnest, almost direct-to-camera rants that various characters give at various, like, very, very delineated, like, very framed-off parts of the movie. And it just has this... I'm currently going through the first season of Star Trek: The Next Gen, which has some similar problems in how over-earnest and ridiculous it is at the same time.
Yeah.
And it has that feeling of like just like the captain's monologues at the end of a Star Trek episode where they summarize the morals of it. Like Shyamalan is really very committed to the myth of his own perceptive brilliance.
Oh, he so is. Have you ever seen The Lady in the Water?
Oh God, the whole plot of that is that the writer knows best and pay attention to him because he's the most important person in the world.
And he's played by M. Night Shyamalan. Also he kills the critic. It's so overt. I mean, The Lady in the Water is what happens when Shyamalan has no reins whatsoever, when there's no parameters, there's no restrictions, and what it is a portrait of ego on the screen. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like he took his own ego and smeared it across a film cell,
Yeah, very much. I think he was at the absolute sort of zenith of his powers when he made that.
Yeah.
Because I think any earlier, or indeed now, I don't think he'd get that commission.
Oh, no,
but
no
he
one
was
would
at
go
that
near that
point where it could do no wrong, really, as far as ticket sales were concerned.
Oh, he was doing well, wasn't he? I mean, after
Yeah.
The Sixth Sense, I mean, even though he basically recreated the same film but with slightly different actors, I mean, The Sixth Sense, Signs, The Village, they're all the same film. They are all structurally the same story with just slightly different tweaks and ideas, he could do no wrong. He made box office.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why that got commissioned, because it very much seemed like you'd half expect it to be one of them student films where the main the director is the same person as the writer, who is also the lead actor, who is also in charge of the music, who is also, it's just entirely him. At no point does it occur to him that someone else might be useful to have helping out.
The Tommy Wiseau approach to filmmaking.
It feels like one of them projects, but with money. That's basically what it is.
Oh man,
it's interesting Rowan mentioning about Star Trek there, because I've watched the original series of Star Trek for the first time this year, and I've very much enjoyed it. I've never watched it before, I've never given it time, but I've really got into it, and I've been buying merchandise from it and everything. But I'm really got no interest in watching The Next Generation or Voyager or any of the others, because I have this feeling, which Rowan has just confirmed there, that they are going to take themselves very seriously.
Yeah.
And that they kind of have this grave po-facedness about them, which everything I love about the original series is that it's quite light-hearted, and it's got that kind of space-agey feel to it, and it's quite genuinely funny when it means to be funny, and it doesn't take itself that seriously. And from what I remember watching some of The Next Generation and stuff growing up, because my dad used to like it, and I remember all of that being gone. And it's suddenly very cold, very serious. This matters. This is important. This is deep, And I don't want any of that. That's not why I'm watching Star Trek. So once I'm done with all the original series stuff, I don't feel as if I'm going to move into the other ones for that reason.
It's a weird sort of blend with The Next Generation, because they have a lot of the premises of the episodes. I mean, some of them are outright stolen from the earlier seasons. They were obviously struggling, and some of them are not just bad technically, but offensively bad. I mean, there's one where the aliens are just they're just a stereotype caricature of Africans, and then they're aliens, and like they kidnap the one of the women from the
Oh, dear.
Enterprise and try to marry her.
Oh God!
Oh,
Wow.
it just gets worse as it goes on. It's. I think everyone involved fairly has said that they deeply regret it. And there's another episode where they try to do a similar thing with like an all-female, well, not an all-female, but a female-led society. But it's also apparently a ham-fisted attempt to satirize South Africa at the time, which is just really weird, and it never plays off.
Oh.
There's a lot of like really dodgy episodes in season one Next Gen, but but they still have really zany premises, but they also have the earnestness on top of that, which creates this really weird cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
I don't dislike it all, and I have heard that season 2 is a massive improvement. Apparently, that's when the guy who played Riker grew a beard between seasons, and on Hollywood, growing a beard has become a term for a season dramatically improving between season 1 and season 2. As a kind of like
I
a
like
general.
that.
Growing a beard. I'm going to adopt that myself as terminology. I think that's brilliant.
It's a really, and also the characters aren't quite how you think of them from the later seasons. Like Riker is a deeply sad character in season 1 Next Gen. He's this committed careerist who's clearly like given up on every other aspect of his life and has this like really fake macho persona. And I think they just get rid of that for his character and turn him into a much more grounded and rounded character in the later seasons. But you kind of feel like really sorry for him watching the first season.
Oh, that's really interesting because, I mean, what I know of the Next Gen is that Riker is very much that character. You know, he is the sort of hyper-masculine, forthright, competent guy who always knows what to do, you know?
I don't think they dropped the hyper-masculine aspects. You know, he's got this kind of like American South kind of, you know, Southern state kind of like groundedness.
Right.
And he plays, I think, always a bit into the kind of, I mean, when Star Trek was originally conceived, you know, in the first stuff, it was very much sort of like a spaghetti western in space. Yeah. And so I think he plays into that. Riker's very much, he's an ode to the old Shatner ship captain.
Yeah.
You got Patrick Stewart as this very intellectual, cerebral captain who's a little more standoffish than having a number one who sort of is, you know, a bit of a womanizer still.
Right.
And is a bit more like practically minded, kind of gives you that balance. But in season 1, his character is just very awkwardly like handled, despite also not having the, you know, his trademark. But yeah. Oh, sorry, I found a way to waylay the conversation again.
No, not at all. Not at all. This is how it goes. You know, this is how it goes.
So what was your two first one horrors that you remember seeing then? Or bits of? Because like mine was a bit of both. As I said, I remember seeing bits of those other films before I watched The Gate. But The Gate is the first full one.
I mean, for me, it's odd because I didn't watch very much that was sort of like beyond even a PG rating until maybe my early teens. I mean, it was really rare that I'd see anything. I didn't actually come from a very strict family, but you know, I think there was a lot of sort of sensitivities around violence, and that actually very rapidly shifted in my teen years, where sort of whole different philosophy of media was adopted by my family, so I could suddenly watch everything all at once. But consequently, I missed a lot of the 80s films I only saw much later, in my early 20s or late teens. Later than that sometimes. And even the early 90s films, that was the case. So, like, the first film that I can remember, horror film maybe I can remember watching all the way through, and it's hard to say, it's probably a toss-up between Scream from 1996 and I think The Faculty was one. It's not especially important, but it was
I haven't thought about that for a long time.
I got it from Blockbusters. It was a film that because we picked out different films, and I think eventually, rather than squabble over which film we picked out, we got to pick out our own.
Yeah, it's always the best way to do it, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think I was being a bit belligerent at the time, and I wanted to watch something a bit more like 18 Certificate, a bit more dark, but no one else was interested, so I ended up watching it alone and had an experience of horror. So that film really genuinely terrified me. I don't think I finished it the first time. I think I came back to it and finished it because I was really deeply disturbed by it. And I don't think coming back to it, having more experience, I found it especially scary at all. But that first time, I think it's Elijah Wood's one of his early debuts, and it's a really odd movie. It's got some quite extreme violence in it. There's something with a pencil, I vaguely recall, going through someone's eye, and and then there's a film also where the characters definitely would have difficulty denying it happened afterwards, given entire town has been massacred.
Yeah.
But it's an odd movie. It's very sinister in the whole way that it plays out. It's I think more tropey than I realized when I saw it. So I was unfamiliar with all the tropes. But yeah, and Scream, which I took to just be a straightforward horror movie.
Of course, because you wouldn't have the background,
frames of reference,
the context.
Yeah.
So it kind of seemed like a hokey, but also quite graphically disturbing movie.
Yeah.
But I remember watching the 80s ones with a friend down the road when I was sort of later in my teens. I found a lot of them quite funny at the time because my expectations of movies had shifted. I remember very vividly the scene where the boy explodes into a geyser of blood in the Nightmare of Elm turning to the girl next to me, and we both just in hysterics laugh for the next
Johnny Depp. It's Johnny Depp who gets dragged into the bed and turns into a fountain of blood.
I think what was really funny about it wasn't even the the hyperbole of his death scene, but the fact that it immediately not even a second's delay cuts to an ambulance outside the house. Get the sense of what are they going to do?
I was going to say there's not even a body to take away, is there? It's he's been turned into a fountain of blood.
They have a stretcher, so I assume they're just going to collect all the blood on the stretcher. They need kits rather than a portable bed, but. The contrast of this explosive death and then an ambulance was just incredibly funny. Yeah. I think in retrospect, a lot of those 80s movies obviously didn't take themselves very seriously, and there's a lot of self-parody.
There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek. I mean, a lot of the Wes Craven ones in particular are very aware of what they're doing, you know.
And then earlier than that, there was a lot of movies, having not seen a lot of horror movies, that I think were sort of regarded by my siblings and I as kind of if not horror, then as substitutes for it. And I don't know, I can't remember fully how much that was tongue-in-cheek. I remember my sisters saying they wouldn't watch Pinocchio without me because it was so scary. I didn't find it especially frightening, but they allegedly found the whale.
The whale, Monstro.
Definitely got horror elements to it. The way it's shot, it's a very muted colour palette to that whole film. It's very dark and I'd say there's definitely some horror stuff in that film.
It's a beautiful sequence as well. The part with Monstro. I mean, when you consider this was before a lot of the automation of animation, so every time that thing breaks the surface, or every little spray of water, and there's a lot of it. The seagulls flying, the spray in the air. It's all hand animated. It's gorgeous.
I always thought the scene where the friend of Pinocchio is transformed into a donkey was more traumatic. That was actually genuinely horrific. Also, the moralism around it made it a lot worse. Like the film wanted you to endorse this happening to a kid who was just like, he's a little rude and a little
I was going to say,
Yeah,
I mean, they
yeah.
don't even do anything that terrible, do they? I mean, there's scenes of them smoking and drinking and whatnot, but he doesn't actually do anything that awful. I don't see any of them doing anything that awful, but they get turned into donkeys for the crime.
Mm.
There are horrific scenes where they're all packed together in crates and crying and whatnot, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh my god. Yeah, not nice.
And
Not
those films,
nice.
like, I mean, especially early Disney films, really like weren't sentimental about their characters at all.
No, no, no.
No.
Mm.
They were not. There are a few sequences in some of those early Disney films they're very much sort of the trauma of generations, you know?
And I remember a couple of Goosebumps episodes as well. And like Goosebumps was variable; it generally wasn't frightening at all. But I think Night of the Living Dummy often came
Oh my
Oh yeah,
god.
yeah.
because that main character, the antagonist, I can't remember the
I was
name
going
of
to
the
say,
guy.
what's the name of the dummy? It's something very specific, isn't it?
It's
I can't
definitely
remember.
like I feel like they wanted it to be like a known sort of monster villain. Like they were really
Yeah.
going for that one, but it didn't quite work out that way. I don't think many people sort of really remember it, but he is like genuinely like, you don't usually get the sense that the children's lives are at risk in Goosebumps,
Not
and
really.
it's almost, I don't know if it ever happens that anybody. I think maybe the closest a character comes to dying in Goosebumps is in The Cuckoo Clock of Doom, where the young sister is erased from history, but this
Mhm.
is depicted as like a thoroughly good thing because she was slightly mean to her older brother.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the punishment doesn't quite. I mean, she was very mean. I guess she like spoils his parties and stuff, and
Mhm.
embarrasses him in front of his date and
But
such. But
but even
erased from
so,
time doesn't seem to be quite the proportionate
I was
punishment.
going to say, as punishments go, that's the ultimate one, isn't it?
I always thought Are You Afraid of the Dark was scarier than Goosebumps. They seem to go for more like full-on
Yeah,
actual sort of horror rather than Goosebumps did.
It did seem to be a thing at the time, didn't it? That sort of like
Yeah,
mid to late 1990s. There was a trend for there to be children's horror series, particularly on channels like Nickelodeon and whatnot.
yeah, yeah,
mm.
And I remember more than anything from Are You Afraid of the Dark, the opening sequence, which was
yeah,
genuinely the stuff of nightmares.
yeah. It was. There was an empty swing. That's
Mm.
the first thing you picture is an empty swing moving
Right,
about on its
right.
own.
And that weird sort of like stuttering panning camera in the
Yeah,
dark, it's creepy. Whereas Goosebumps tended to go for the more ghost train ride horror, didn't it? You know, there's the slightly like Halloween haunted house horror where it was very visual and very sort of fun to look at.
I think Goosebumps was sort of like the childlike spiritual successor to like Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas Are You Afraid of the Dark was much more subtle, sort of portmanteau horror, let's have three different ghost stories sort of a thing. It didn't quite have the, like you said, the ghost train. Oh, there's a big skeleton jumping out
Right.
at you. It had that kind of a thing in Goosebumps.
I mean,
Whereas,
I do recall
yeah,
getting some of the Goosebumps books from the local library when I was a kid, and I mean, it was one of those things where I kind of appreciated them for what they were, but
Mm.
because by that point I'd already read Stephen King and a couple of others, you know,
sure.
it was sort of like, yeah, it's fun, it's fine, but it's not frightening at all, you know.
Mm.
I think by the time I started reading the Goosebumps books, I'd already read like Desperation by Stephen King, which is a full
Sure.
blown, like completely horrific, visceral horror.
Oh, yeah.
So they never grabbed me as such. But that series, the Nickelodeon series of Goosebumps, is so well remembered, so
Oh, yeah.
fondly
Yeah.
remembered.
It's not badly filmed. I mean, the acting is really hammy, but that's in keeping.
Yeah, yeah.
And it has. I mean, there's not. I've recently rewatched a few episodes, so I was sort of showing them to someone else, and they really do like epitomize that feeling of the 90s.
Yeah.
Like the. It's actually very rare to see things that are so dateable to the 90s because the 90s are such a sort of empty decade in
Yeah,
terms of
it's true.
aesthetics.
That's true.
It's a decade that. Oh, sorry. Pardon my microphone.
Oh, no problem. Was that the microphone again? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it does that. But it has that kind of endlessly burrowed aesthetics, but somehow Goosebumps doesn't have a stuff that seems like it's nostalgic for earlier periods.
Yeah.
It just feels like the most concentrated form of sort of middle class white suburban.
Yeah.
You know, like that whole feel, and I even like down to like its kind of hokiness is like very much of its time.
Yeah.
In its expectations and stuff. Like I remember the episode with the camera that like shows like bad fates, and of course
Right.
it's like really tame. It like makes one person disappear for like an hour, and at one point it suggests a car crash, but then it turns out like nobody dies. One person got like their leg busted a little bit. Like
Right.
it's like ridiculously like underwhelming.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where the main character is being bullied, and the bullies want the camera, and the main character, obviously being good, won't let the bullies take the camera and use it on themselves because then something bad will happen to them. So even though they're bullies, you know,
Right.
they're still human, blah blah blah.
Blah, blah,
And
blah,
then he
yeah.
goes to his girlfriend, and the girlfriend is like pressuring him to take a picture, and rather than just like admit like, oh, this is like a cursed camera, or just like smash the camera or something, he eventually just relents. So, the tone between like him just being willing to like do anything to save the bullies, including taking a beating, to like not willing to take like the slightest awkwardness around his girlfriend in order to save her, was slightly strange in terms of his value system. That felt very 90s, like the kind of completely skewed like sense of like what was proportionate and what's moral kind of felt like, you know, like everything is sort of like a moral story. Like even within an episode, there are like self-contained micro moral stories within, which are often just abandoned in order to affect the twist. So like there's one where there are all these rumors of monsters, and then it's revealed that the main family are the monsters.
Oh, the monsters, that's right. And it's the Camp Terror one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the one about a girl who's sent away to like a summer camp or something, and there are rumors of like monsters in the woods, and lo and behold, like all of the other campers start to go missing. I think she gets chased at one point or harassed by something. And then at the end, it's really weird. It turns out that this, like, her family put her through it as a kind of training because it ends in this just bizarre twist where she's being trained to go on a trip to an alien world that's very dangerous, and then her family say, "Oh, it's called Earth," and it's fine.
That's fine. 1950s horror comic, sci-fi comic sort of a thing.
Very much so. I mean, there is a charm to them, though. I will say that. I mean, both the show and the books, there is a real charm to them. And I really appreciate the fact that like R.L. Stine kind of opened up a lot of children to horror, you know?
There's no ill will in R.L. Stine. Like,
not at all.
A lot of these like crummy children's writers, I can think of one in particular, often are revealed to be deeply unpleasant people.
Oh yeah.
And like he's just very earnest, and he likes the engagement. He likes entertaining kids, and he does that quite well.
Yeah, it comes through, doesn't it? It comes through in the work.
If he wasn't writing children's book, you can imagine him like running a haunted house at a carnival and being massively enthusitic about it, because he just loves doing that kind of thing and giving kids a little scare for a laugh. He's just that guy. That's just his avenue through which he does it.
Well, he clearly knows his onions, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Because like the Goosebumps books were, I mean, I don't know if they're as big as they used to be, but they were everywhere. They were absolutely enormous.
They're like short stories, aren't they? Each one is about 40 pages, and it usually has like very big sort of font size. So they're probably like 10,000 words, 15,000 words each. And he could sort of like push them out really quickly, and I remember seeing it like in children's, even in toy shops actually, just not even bookshops, but sometimes you just see them in a toy store. You just see a whole line, and they were wonderful colours. So he had that like bubbly effect on all of them, so they were very recognizable, although they were all different vivid primary colours.
I remember those prints. They were beautiful, actually. I really like those. If I was going to go out and buy all of the Goosebumps books, those are the ones I'd like to track down.
Yeah. The original first or second sort of printing from the mid-90s.
I do seem to recall as well there were like series within Goosebumps as well. So there were like the dummy books. I think there were 3 or 4 of the.
I think like the ones
books
that were particularly well landed, they did a few, like the Halloween Land ones with that. I think they did a few from that as well.
Yes, I remember the Halloween Land ones. That was really good. I like that one a lot.
And of course, because he ended everything on a twist ending, any story could be extended quite easily. So it sort of was. I think probably later he started like going back and doing like earlier ones, like sequels to earlier ones even. But yeah. The Night of the Living Dummy was, I think, one of the most popular.
Oh, definitely. That's the one. People who were kids in the 1990s who read those books, that's the one they always remember. They don't necessarily remember the name, but they would say, "Oh, the one with the dummy." That's usually what you get. Or the one, for some reason, a lot of people remember the one with the Halloween mask, the haunted Halloween mask that some girl buys, and it actually turns her into like a monster.
That's been done a few times, hasn't it?
Oh, that's been done a million times, that has, yeah.
I don't think there's any premise in it. I mean, it'd actually be interesting to see if there's a premise in an R.L. Stine book that is completely unique to Goosebumps. Like, no one else has done it.
I sincerely doubt it.
I mean, usually...
Sorry, go on, Rowan.
No, I was just gonna say they usually like directly reference what they're riffing on, either on the title or just obviously in the premise.
There is
clearly that.
There's one that's kind of a take off The Thing, but the original version of The Thing, which is where it's a guy experimenting with plants, and it kind of the plant grows itself into like a human form of the dad himself, and kind of imprisons him and then replaces him, and you kind of the daughter has to figure out that actually it's not really him, it's a plant monster. But the original version of The Thing, the Who Goes There, the alien was a plant-based creature who did that, and that's kind of obviously inspired by that. I mean, you say that The Thing, you don't necessarily think of plant monsters because people think of the Carpenter version, which is kind of the definitive one. But originally, the original version of the film was like a plant-based thing.
So more like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, yeah?
Yeah. So that I think that one with the plant creature thing that looked like this girl's dad, I think that was the inspiration for that kind of comes from the original Who Goes There.
I vaguely remember that one because that one is actually really quite scary.
Yeah, it is.
There are lots of moments where it's the girl and the dad that's not the dad in like the same room together, and it's very claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And she's noticing little things, little characteristics that her dad doesn't have.
Yes.
That this thing is affecting.
That kind of draws on like quite real fears, doesn't it?
Oh, that's a primal child fear, isn't it? Like the loss of a parent or the invasion of the home by something unfamiliar. Yeah, very much so.
This is one of the reasons it didn't happen a lot to me, but one of the reasons I never really liked seeing adults around me drink like at parties and stuff, because it would turn them, as it does, into versions of themselves that I wouldn't usually see. Yeah. And I would find that very discomforting as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like that uncle who's usually really sharp and intellectual and funny now turns into this slurring idiot who repeats himself. And I just used to be very disturbed by that as a child.
I've got to say I was very lucky in that regard because none of my close family drink. None of them at all, you know.
Well, none of them did drink like at home, but like when you'd have a Christmas party or something like that, you know, or a wedding reception or something where you're like, oh, it's my Uncle so I love him. But then you'd go and try and talk to him and it almost wasn't him because this was him after 4 pints of beer.
Right,
you know?
Right, so, yeah, of course.
That kind of fear is of, you know, it looks and sounds like the person who you think it is, but actually it's kind of not.
I mean, to a child as well, the notion that an adult is out of control or that's a frightening notion. That's a very frightening concept.
Yeah, very much.
I think the only experience I have like that came in like later teenage years when my dad suffered with a really bad back problem and couldn't seem to do anything for the pain. And one of his friends at work told him to try a marijuana cigarette. And my dad did, but my dad, not having ever taken it before, didn't know what to do.
Sure.
So smoked the whole thing.
Right.
And I remember finding him just sort of sprawled out on the stairs, saying, I can't get up the stairs," which was actually really funny in retrospect.
Yeah.
But you know, that's about as close as it's ever got, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I find I've been thinking about this one all day, to be honest, guys, because I can't. Horror films have always been around.
Yeah.
I can't. They're like, to me, they're ambient. They're very much like children's franchises. You know, they're like Transformers or Turtles or whatever. I can't remember a time when they didn't exist. Because my mum is such an inveterate horror fan. She's always had VHSs of horrors. And my brother and I have always been allowed to watch pretty much what we liked, you know, under the proviso that if it scared us, then we wouldn't be watching anymore, you know. But they never really did. I mean, it was explained to us very early on. Like, one of the ways my parents used to stop us being scared is they used to tell us how things were done. So they would sit and explain to us, like when we were watching effects on the screen, they would tell us what the effects were and how they did it. Oh, that's latex. It's like this, you know. That I distinctly remember watching Hellraiser and my mum like saying that. Well, that's latex. It's like a rubbery material that tears in a particular way, and they do that like this and they do that like this and whatnot, and it takes the edge away. You know, it actually takes the sort of fear element away. I remember more than I cannot for the life of me remember what the first horror film was. It's too early, and I can't discern one from the other. You know, it was so early on. But I can remember images.
Yes.
I can remember images that locked in my mind and have just basically burned there forever, ever since that time. I distinctly remember the scenes in The Evil Dead where Ash is down in the basement.
Oh yes, with the lady, the zombie granny sort of.
That's the one, yeah. And that for some reason having like an image that's lodged in my head, but which to my child self was much bigger. So when I came to watch it again, I was surprised at how short that sequence was.
Yes.
And I was surprised at how little time was spent in the basement.
Yeah, I always had this with Return of the Jedi because one of my favourite bits from that was the scene with the giant monster under Jabba the Hutt's palace.
Oh,
I can't remember the name of the damn thing now.
The Bantha, yeah?
Is that what it's called?
I think
yeah,
so,
the Jabba the Hutt's got it under his palace and he feeds it, and Luke puts a bone in its mouth and all that. And I had a toy of it. I've still got a toy of it, in fact, which my auntie bought me for Christmas, and I used to love that bit. And I remember that as being like a huge part of the film. But then, as you say, you watch it and it's like a 3-minute sequence.
It's literally like nothing, is it? Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
At all. It's barely an important part of the film, but because it's stuck in your mind so much, you kind of assign an importance to it.
Exactly, yeah. And because, of course, they're some of the earliest images that you see, so of course they have much more of an impression.
Yeah.
Another one for me is the sequence. I mean, there are lots of images from Alien in my early memory. And that's one of the rare films from that era that I watched again and again and again and again, and it never loses its power. I always find it to be massively affecting, really beautiful, very powerful. But for me, the images that stuck in my mind from that film were the ones inside the alien ship. The H.R. Giger design, sort of like organic, biomechanical. There really is nothing like it, is there? It's not just the designs, it's the way it's shot, it's the way it's lit. It feels unlike anything else, other than other Alien films, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So that very much lodged in my memory. Terminator is definitely another one, Lex. That's just like you. Terminator is one. I must have watched the first Terminator when I was very young and loved it.
Same here.
I
yeah.
remember.
I very clearly remember the metal skeleton coming out of the fire.
Yes, that's exactly
that
it. The stop motion metal skeleton when it first comes out of the fire.
Yeah.
Because it's a false ending, isn't it? You know, you could be forgiven for thinking it's over.
Yeah.
At that moment, and then it comes out of the fire, and it's this brilliant stop motion thing, you know, which makes it all the scarier. There's something about the jerky movements of stop motion that makes it very, very frightening.
It is, but I never quite understood why it moves less fluidly without all the flesh on it.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
You think surely it'd be more mobile now?
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I mean, the reality of that is because of the effects. It's the best they could do.
Yeah.
But even in the modern ones, as soon as the skin's off, they walk like robots.
Right.
But then with the skin on, they walk like humans.
That's a little odd, isn't it? That's a little weird. Predator.
Yes.
Predator, when I was a kid, was the shit. It was the best thing ever. I remember watching Predator for the first time. I remember getting it on VHS from the local video shop. And my brother, my mom, and I sitting and watching it. And yeah, bear in mind, we were young kids at that time. So, like, you know, relatively short attention spans. We sat and watched that film from beginning to end, and we loved it.
I watched that film with my granddad very young because that was his favourite film.
Right.
Because he loved horror. Wow. He loved horror movies. He loves science fiction, and he loved big action movies. Predator is like the perfect marriage of those three things, isn't it?
It's so strange, Predator, because it's like the kind of film that just isn't made anymore. You know, it's simultaneously, it doesn't fit into any particular bracket. It's an action film. It's a horror film. It's slightly political. You know, it's got these very sort of raw commentaries on things like Vietnam and whatnot. So it is very much a post-Vietnam film. It's an Arnold Schwarzenegger action film.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. Like, from beginning to end, it's absolutely stunning. I mean, like, every sequence is beautiful. And it has images that, again, I just cannot, will never leave my mind. The image of the Predator holding up the dead scorpion in front of its thermal vision. The image of the green blood on the leaves.
Yeah.
And of course the big one, the creature taking off its helmet and revealing its spidery arachnid face.
Yeah.
It's one of those films where if I wanted to, I could close my eyes and replay it, like from the opening credits right through to the end.
I know what you mean. Yeah, it is one of them, definitely.
It's burned in there. It's just burned in there and will never ever go away, I don't think.
Something it has in common with Alien, although vastly different, and it's strange that they've collided those two together in franchise terms. But something it does have in common with the first Alien film is that both films are incredibly economical when it comes to plot. Like, they don't really have anything in them that's extraneous to the story itself. You know, every single thing, every scene that happens in Alien moves towards the final scene and does so quite perfectly. And the same for Predator. There's nothing redundant. It either, you know, furthers the Predator's own development in terms of his hunt or furthers Schwarzenegger's character's eventual victory. And I think that's what makes those films quite memorable, because they are so economical. There's not a lot of fluff to sort of like sort out in terms of your memory of the film.
No, it's true.
A series of like really concrete moments that all build towards something. I mean, you get that with like films very rarely today, I think.
It's totally true. What I find amazing about both Alien and Predator is there is this incredible economy. Like, you never ever get characters sitting around talking about their motivations or why they're here or what they're doing. What you get are these almost documentary looks at them as people. So
they're just getting on with the job.
Right.
It's like they seem real in that way.
Yeah.
You know, you never get like, I'll tell you what, Ripley, it sure is a hard job transporting cargo across space for the I've been doing for the last 5 years.
No,
and I really miss my wife.
It's like it's like the breakfast scene. You know, when they first wake up on the Nostromo and then you get the breakfast scene after. and they're just talking about things like the job they've got to do. They're just talking about their bonuses. They're bickering slightly,
Yeah.
you know. It's
Yeah.
very human, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And yet at the same time, you get more a sense of defined character from them than you do from any of the characters in, say, Prometheus or in Covenant.
Because
Yeah.
if someone's character is just announced to you, I think your gut instinct is to just not believe it. Like in
Yeah.
real life, if someone just comes up to you and says, "Yeah, I'm a bit of an intellectual, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm an introvert, and I don't like people very much," like A, that's just weird,
Hmm.
and B, like you'd think that they were putting on some kind of act, like it's a
Yeah.
front.
There is
Um,
a case of the lady doth protest too much, isn't there, you know?
Whereas if you see who a character is through their actions, and I think all the Alien characters, I think even better than Predator, are fantastic for this. And there's some wonderful like tensions aboard the ship in
Hmm.
terms of the different roles they perform. Even, I mean, there's a class dynamic to what's
Yeah,
going on the ship.
totally.
There's complaints about different people earning different amounts and different expectations, and union involvement, I think, is mentioned at least once.
Yep.
I might be wrong in that, but I think it is there.
No, I think you're right. I
Um,
think you're absolutely right. Like the two characters who are very much like the lower decks characters, the engineers, do mention unionization a couple of times.
and then the whole thing with the duplicity of the corporation and the android, that's allowed to play out through his untrustworthy actions, not through like him being singled out as
Right.
like some pensive but slightly Ubermenchian other, which is how they single out the robot, I think, in
Yeah,
the Prometheus films.
definitely. Yeah.
Where I think it is even like slightly good that it's not like the most conventionally attractive person that they have be the android in the first Alien
Right.
film.
Well, of course, in the first Alien film, I mean, this people forget this, but you don't know he's an android.
No,
Uh,
not at all.
it's not a thing, you know. It's not a concept. Not like, I mean, it becomes the standard in Aliens that there is an android character, of
Sure.
course. But Ash, played by Ian Holm in Alien, you have no idea until someone literally knocks his head off.
Yeah, but why would they talk about that? You
Right.
know that they know this guy's an android. They've always known.
Mm-hmm.
Why would somebody say, "Oh, you know that guy? He's an android." It's like, yeah, we know.
It's just
it's like
yeah.
exposition, isn't it?
And
to
also,
just
I
put in-
mean, it's the naturalistic element of it. So it is company policy that there is an android on every mission.
yeah,
So you would just accept it, wouldn't you? It would just be like, oh, okay, fine, whatever.
yeah,
And exposition in contemporary films has become, I think, a real blight. I mean, you look at, I think, especially of the Marvel movies, I think just do dumps of the thing, usually with a very contrived, like they'll all have a meeting where they'll just tell you stuff that that everybody at the meeting already knows, and they will just tell each other it. And it's so obviously talking to the audience. And I think when it comes to character details, that tends to come out most of all, because I don't think that the writers of these shows are very confident in their abilities to convey characters through actions. And so they just have various ways of announcing it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is a blight on like modern, present day filmmaking in generally. There is this tendency for characters to blather on about themselves and about their motivations and about what they're doing, and they're not talking to other characters, they're talking to the audience. You see it very much in a lot of the remakes of like Disney films, for example, like the live action remakes of Disney films. There is this tendency for those live action remakes to try and exposit on their characters in a way that's totally unnecessary. So they try to give them all backstories and motivations that are almost universally Freudian for some reason. And the way they convey those motivations is characters announce them. They talk about them. They say things like you've got Gaston from Beauty and the Beast talking about, oh, I was in a war, don't you know, and it did this to me, and it's like, I don't care. I don't want to know. It doesn't mean anything to me. Or even you get the cardinal sin, which is where they make entire films and franchises around those Freudian backstories. So you've got Maleficent, which is exactly that. It's exactly that, and ironically powerfully anti-feminist, despite believing itself to be a feminist project. I have no doubt the up-and-coming Cruella is going to be exactly the same.
That
Yeah,
does look
quite probably.
spectacularly bad. I have to say the
Yeah.
quality, like she's a dog murderer. Like trying to
Right.
like invest a dog murderer with psychological complexity
Right.
just seems like a fraught and tortured project from the start. But I am looking forward, and I really hope they do make it a film giving the Freudian backstory for the villain from Hunchback of Notre Dame, because
Frollo.
hilarious.
Oh
Like,
my god.
it'd have to be an 18th certificate film for starters to actually
Where
do it
were
justice.
that would have to be like the Passion of the Christ. It'd have
Yeah,
to be
it
like
would.
violence and abuse and blood and like religious bigotry and zealotry and even like sexual abuse. It would have to be like, I mean, it's bad enough in the actual film, isn't it? I mean, they really go for that motivation in the original animated film. It's surprising how far they do go with it, actually. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine what that would look like.
That would be the first of those live action Disney films I might be tempted to
Right.
see, because so far I assume you can't avoid them because you need to, for work purposes, go to see some pretty spectacularly bad movies.
Oh, you wouldn't believe. I mean, I've developed a high tolerance. I've developed a very, very high tolerance. I've been dragged to see the Smurfs films. I've been dragged to see some execrable shit. I'm telling you, some just execrable shit. And I've got to say, a lot of the Disney remakes are some of the worst of them.
In the context of like Smurfs, and I remember you once saying you had to watch an Alvin and the Chipmunks movie like
Yep.
4 or 5 times in 1 week or something.
That would be about correct, yeah.
And yeah, to say that they're bad in that context is definitely an indictment.
Yeah,
It's a low bar.
Well, the thing is, the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies are what they are. They're terrible in and of themselves, The Disney movies, the live action remakes of animated films, those bizarre films that try to motivate the villains or give you a backstory for the villains, are execrable on a whole other level. A whole other level. It's what they represent that I find most offensive. It's the fact that they only exist because someone in a boardroom decided they have to exist and they're going to make money.
Yeah.
That's one thing. There's no sincere storytelling here. There's no desire to I mean, for whatever problems they have, and believe me, like the old animated Disney films obviously have loads of problems, there is this sincere desire to enchant, to inspire, and I will always get behind that, even regardless of whatever other problems they have, and they often are really beautiful. So the animated Beauty and the Beast from the early 1990s is gorgeous. It's just stunningly beautiful to look at. The same is true of The Little Mermaid, The Lion King. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful films. The live action remakes are so soulless. They've got nothing behind them. I mean, the most vapid, the one that I found the most dull and shorn of any essential spirit was The Lion King. Because that script is written, that story is written to refer to animated characters, to like traditionally animated characters with bigger than average reactions. There's like slapstick inherent to the story. When you try to create it's not live action, obviously it's CG, but when you try to recreate a live action version of that story, it just doesn't work. It just does not work. It comes across as actually kind of uncanny valley in how weird it is.
It's such a weird project, but it seems to be Disney almost admitting what loads of people have suspected for quite a long time, which is that they have no more ideas. I mean, that's why they buy up other studios and rely on their original concepts, and it's why now they're just pilfering their own material.
Yeah.
They have a long-term problem in that they can't produce new films that are actually worthwhile watching.
Right. And it's such a shame. It's such a shame because it's not as though there isn't material out there. If they wanted to produce like Disney style versions of fairy tales or of classic stories, there are plenty. There are plenty of routes they could go down, and I'm fairly certain there is the capacity there to produce some charming work. I've no doubt, but it just, for some reason, it's being strangled by the corporate project of Disney. It's such a shame, because there is still good stuff. I mean, there's TV work that comes out of Disney that's amazing. I mean, Gravity Falls, Lex, we've spoken about that before. Beautiful, absolutely stunning.
Oh, yeah.
The new series of DuckTales, the more recent DuckTales, is... I am shocked at how good that is. It has no right to be as good as it is. Like, no right at all. It's a remake of a sort of late 1980s, early 1990s cartoon show, which is itself an adaptation of a comic from the 50s?
50s,
yeah. We're talking the 50s?
But what always seems to be a success is it's often the case with when you get these big companies, and video games are the same, and comic books, is when you get those projects that the big guys in suits don't really care about.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm making this cartoon, and they're just like, yeah, just get on with it.
Yeah.
And they just kind of let them get on with it, which is how you end up with DuckTales reboot.
Yes.
Or the Gravity Falls is a specific example of that. They just get on with it in their little corner and don't have studio interference. Don't have the men in suits saying, how can we make more money off this? How can we merchandise this? How can we... No, it needs to be more relatable. Stick a jokey kid character in it.
Right.
You don't have that going on. They're just allowed to make the thing they want to make, and they come out with something amazing.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I mean, I can't imagine DuckTales. I can't imagine that they thought it was going to be enormous.
Exactly.
When it was originally optioned, because even like the original DuckTales, it was significant, but it wasn't that big.
It wasn't a big, heavily merchandised sort of money maker for him, was it?
Didn't
You didn't go in the
explode.
Disney store and see a lot of DuckTales stuff.
No, you did not. I mean, it was one of those things that had almost like a cult following.
Yes, exactly.
Back in the day. But the new one is... I was shocked. I've got to say, I started watching it out of sentiment because I used to enjoy the original DuckTales when I was really young. And I was absolutely flabbergasted that actually what they've done is turned it into a vehicle for storytelling. Like sincere mythology building. It's a really good piece of work. I'm still flabbergasted by it now.
Yeah.
I've heard... Sorry,
I was just going to say, I've heard that it was better than anybody expected it was going to be.
Well, what they did was they took all of the original show was very episodic, so it never really had... It had a couple of, like, running story arcs, but they were always contained within episodes that themselves were their own little stories, you know? It wasn't like... It never really built it up in any grand way. But there were these questions that people always used to ask of it. Like, for example, the three kid characters, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Why are they living with their elderly uncle? Where are their parents? Yeah. But that was never even questioned in the original show. In the new one, they've taken that and they've made it the core of the entire narrative. Why aren't their parents around? Where are their parents? And it turns out that Scrooge knows but won't talk about it.
Okay.
And gets very agitated when anyone does ask him. So suddenly you've got tensions. It's very clever.
I've heard it... sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, I've heard it argued before that particular areas of sort of aesthetic creation tend to do well when they're in economic decline. So I've heard a few people say that comics right now are really good. There's like a fascinating sort of renaissance in terms of the quality, but at the same time they're earning no money and they're in terminal decline. They're very likely to become completely impossible to produce in the near future, at least at any scale. Like there'll always be a niche, but in terms of having like a popular production of comics. And you know, you could see like where something is taken up by the mainstream and becomes the property of the executives. You know, I think superheroes, this has definitely happened to. The whole superhero sort of, although not in comics, ironically enough, given that that's their sort of origin point. But in the movies and such, they've become completely dominated by sort of corporate franchising. And it become very staid, very predictable, very, very formulaic. it's a sort of death knell to any kind of artistic production to be capitalistically profitable to do.
It does seem to be the case. I think Lex and I have discussed this before, but certain genres seem to thrive when there is a lack of money behind them.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Because
horror
people
is
don't care as much.
Yeah.
The people producing it aren't sticking their hand in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh, no one's going to buy that anyway, do what you want, which allows like a certain degree of creativity to flourish.
Yeah, of course. And of course, the lack of budget means that you're operating within certain restraints. So you've got to come up with new ways of doing things, new ways of portraying things without the massive budget. I mean, you can even see it within the constraints of certain massive franchises. So if you take the Lord of the Rings films, for example, now the original Lord of the Rings project was, given the scale of the project, actually really low budget. I mean, remarkably low budget given what it was. It's almost like a very big indie film, and no one expected it to make bank. No one expected it to be that significant, which is why basically Peter Jackson was allowed to go away and do whatever the hell he liked.
Yeah.
The result being a spectacular adaptation. I mean, just absolutely stunning. Probably the best a big screen adaptation of The Lord of the Rings could be.
Yeah, it always annoys me when there's talk of making a new version, because I just think, just leave it alone. There's no need.
But
you're not going to improve on that.
Right. Compare and contrast to The Hobbit, which came later, where there is massive studio investment. They fully expect it to be... they expect it to be another Lord of the Rings. So instead of having like one studio involved, which was New Line Cinema, and people who actually believed in the project and so just left it alone, you've got 5 studios involved, all pumping enormous amounts of money into it. And it fails largely. I mean, there are elements of the Hobbit films I like, but by and large they are soulless. They are soulless and massively problematic.
They're hugely padded, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like there's so much in them that shouldn't be there.
It's totally true.
Yeah.
I don't like anything like that where it's like the characters where you're making a film that is a follow-up, or a TV series that is a follow-up to something that became very successful years earlier. And it's like the characters in the film know that they are the follow-up to this thing. So there's lots of like nudging bits. Hey, do you remember this? Do you remember this? You know, and you get that like in any Terminator film after the original 2.
Yeah.
You get all those moments like someone will say, "I'll be back," as if like, no, hang on, you don't know that is a popular catchphrase, because that is a popular catchphrase in our world where the Terminator is a fictional thing. You don't know that one moment where a different T-800 robot walked into a police station and said that. The only guy who heard him say that died 30 seconds later. So why does characters insist on saying it in every film after that?
Yeah.
As if they know that was a significant moment.
It's such a mistake, isn't it?
Insist on playing that Guns N' Roses song that was featured in the second film, as if they know that was on the soundtrack. And it's things like that I hate. It just makes my toes curl.
It's such a mistake
when they do that.
It takes you out of the fiction, doesn't it? It reminds you as the audience that you're watching a created thing.
And it's like the characters know. It's like they're going to turn around and go, "Oh, do you remember this in the other film?" You know, and it's basically that's what they're doing, and I hate it. And The Hobbit is full of that stuff.
It's the self-assuredness of it as well that I really like. I really dislike. It's the ego of the writing. I mean, a really good example of that I find is Doctor Who a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So much of Doctor Who is just made of that sort of self-referential, self-aware, like bloviating. And whenever it does it, I want to smash my face through the screen.
It's at its absolute worst whenever the Doctor becomes a moralist. And I remember there was an especially bad example of that. I can't remember which Doctor it was. They seem interchangeable after a certain point. Which I guess maybe that is a praise for the concept of the character. But there's a fight between these different factions. I think one of the factions is humanity even. There's like an invading force. And it ends up with the Doctor trying to broker a peace in this war room between the two rivals. And he uses, and I know what he's drawing on it is really kind of annoying. He uses John Rawls, a philosopher, John Rawls, um, behind the veil idea. It's idea that the best way to design a just society would be that you take everybody out of who they are, and they don't know who they're going to be in society. You ask them to design a society that's best for everybody, place them back into society, and presumably, well, they would have wanted to cater to everyone's needs to some degree, so that no one would be left out because they could be at any.
You don't know where you're going to be in that society,
right?
Yeah.
It's a theory that's obviously quite easy to break apart. Like, it depends upon creating a whole notion of humanity that doesn't actually exist in the real world. Blah blah blah. It's not a well-respected theory, but the Doctor draws on this very clearly. If you know, like, John Rawls, in order to sort of settle this dispute. And there's a few sort of very wink moments where he's clearly doing that. And you just get the feeling of this writer who knows John Rawls' work and is obviously taken to it, just thinking he's doing the most brilliant thing ever by putting this really laboured and completely unnatural dialogue into this scene that in real life would absolutely not settle a conflict between two species where they fundamentally share no values.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, Doctor Who is full of that stuff. It's that very sort of sensuous liberal sort of smugness that just motivates so much of the series. I think it's gotten worse from what I've heard. Later series.
Sadly so. I mean, I really wanted the latter series to work. I really wanted it to work, if only to shut up all of the sort of misogynist neckbeards out there who were just grumbling because the character is female now. Unfortunately, the writing is beyond atrocious now.
Yeah, it's not been great, has it? Which is, I was the same as you. I really wanted it to be great, sort of, so we could showcase how good it could be with a female Doctor. But through no fault of hers.
It's not her fault. No, it's not her fault. It's the writing. The writing is atrocious. It was also a mistake to surround that character with the hangers-on that they have.
Yes.
It's almost like they've tried to shield her, It's like, oh, don't worry, there's a male presence in the TARDIS, and it's like, oh, why did you have to do that? Why did you have to do that? I mean, it's encapsulated for me in a particular episode called Kablam. Kablam is probably the worst episode ever written of Doctor Who. I mean, even when Doctor Who is at its worst, there is at least this attempt, it seems to me, to try and critique the status quo, even when it does it poorly, there is an attempt at that. Kablam doesn't. Kablam is agitprop. It's the worst form of agitprop. So essentially, the Kablam conceit is that the corporation Kablam is basically the intergalactic Amazon. You can order anything from there. And people start disappearing and things start to go wrong. People start to get packages that are killing them or whatever. And there is this hideous speech towards the end where the Doctor says, and she says it blatantly, the camera is looking right at her. So she's talking to you. She's talking to the audience. The problem isn't the system. The problem is people within the system who abuse it. And it's like, fuck you. Oh, my reaction to that was so strong. It was like, fuck you. So in the space of a season, we've gone from the episode Oxygen, which isn't very good, but it does sort of provide a particular critique of capitalism overtly, which is essentially that given the chance, capitalist systems would basically charge us for the oxygen we use. That's essentially what it's saying. To Kablam, which is an apology for the working conditions at Amazon.
Yeah.
Usually when Doctor Who is sort of bad in terms of plot terms, I always have this thing where it has this like and then syndrome. The way that like really young children tell stories in disconnected episodes. So and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And you kind of feel like that with the worst Doctor Who episodes. There's an episode where they I think they go back to assassinate Hitler. It's not the Doctor's idea.
Oh
It's one
God,
of the others.
yeah.
And that has that. That has the and then syndrome all over
Yeah.
it. It's just one disconnected thing happening after another, and you get the feeling like if you gave a 4-year-old the chance to create a plot line, this is what they would come up with. But yeah, I mean, like the preaching for Amazon is an especially low point for a show that actually had like, I mean, in the early Doctor, apparently they had like a lot of like communists on the writer team. And,
well, clearly,
yeah,
if you watch some of the earlier episodes, like the Tom Baker ones and whatnot, there is this real sort of push for a kind of socialism or underneath everything. But that for me is when I stopped watching, and I haven't stopped watching for a while. I actually did suffer through some of the worst episodes of the Smith era and the Capaldi era. And don't get me wrong, when it's good, it can be very good, There are certain episodes that are excellent, actually. There's one in the Capaldi era called Heaven Sent, which is beautiful. It's sincerely beautiful. But that happens when Doctor Who realises that in order to work, it's got to be good science fiction, as well as just good Doctor Who. And Heaven Sent is good. It's actually fantastic. It's a really gorgeous, clever, dark, wonderful episode, which is bounded by terrible episodes, sadly.
That's often the way,
I feel that about Star Trek as well. A lot of the best episodes of the season 1 Next Gen, or even like episodes with good threads, because they often combine 2 plot lines in each episode, and one of them can be really good and one of them can be garbage.
Yeah.
There's quite a few episodes like that. But the best stuff is where they abandon this Star Trek obsession with having real world analogues, where like an alien species will be kind of like some kind of ethnic group, and there'll be some kind of like some conflict that was going on at the time of the series being produced, and where they abandon that and they just have an alien that's utterly alien, like an energy cloud or a crystal that can keep replicating itself and then try to communicate, or things like that. Those episodes are strange and they have more tension because you don't really know what's going on. And they're much more interesting.
I always think that with the original series as well, the episodes where it's like, this planet's just like the Romans, and this planet's just like that terrible one with the 1920s Chicago gangster stuff. And, oh God, it's so bad. It's so bad. Anything like that, I can't stand it. But then when it's just like, this is a planet where they worship a giant snake god and they sacrifice people to it, but actually the giant snake god is just the remnants of a fallen satellite computer system, but these people are too primitive to understand it. That's when it's at its best, when it's something like that. It's just straight up science fiction, space age, that kind of a thing. It's when they try and, like you said, compare it to some sort of modern day issue that's going on. It's just like, no, this show is not the vehicle to try and tackle this.
That's it, isn't it? Very often it's a case of having earned that right, isn't it? Some shows have the weight to do it and some don't. That's the truth of it. And very often I find certainly with Doctor Who, it just doesn't have the chutzpah to grapple with the ideas that it thinks it can.
Yeah.
Or the freedom to do it. That's another thing. Because Doctor Who now is this massive franchise, it's a big earner for the BBC, there is so much pressure on it.
Yeah, if you're going to tackle something like the corporate responsibility or the way in which capitalism manipulates people, you have to take a side, and Doctor Who these days doesn't want to. You can't be anodyne. Like you could do an interesting thing where you come to a position that's maybe different to my own on a lot of these issues, but you definitely can't do anything interesting where you come to no position.
Right.
And
that's it. That's exactly what the current Doctor Who is. And that's happened within the space of a season. The irony is some of the latter day Peter Capaldi ones are really near the knuckle. They go for the throat. They're actually very much like some of the early Doctor Who episodes where they are powerfully anti-capitalist, anti-corporate. kind of overtly, I mean, they don't really do much in the way of metaphor. They just tell you this is against capitalism. But for some reason, something happened. I don't know whether they were told to tone it down or what. But you get episodes like Kablam, which is easily the worst I've ever seen. It's the worst not because it's bad in terms of its technicals or its writing or whatever. It's bad because of the positions it takes.
Yeah.
There's that kind of lazy, cynical wisdom, though. That kind of like winking wisdom of saying, "Oh, this is bad, but you can become just as bad by opposing it."
That,
and it sounds like you're saying something really profound, and of course it's on a really silly, superficial level true. Of course, you can become as monstrous as the thing you oppose, but it's so trivially true. Without saying something else, without saying something about how you become, an equivalent monster, maybe. I mean, I think, for example, of V for Vendetta, which actually goes into depths with how the system that creates V did that and how he becomes monstrous and the way in which he is almost a necessary response to the horrifying dimensions of that society. I mean, not that I don't have criticisms of the comic book, but it's aware of those nuances and complexities. It's not just saying, in like the really boring sort of Nietzschean fashion, oh, stare too long into the abyss and then stares back, you become the monster, blah, blah, blah. It's one of those, like, I think that's the problem with, like, wisdom. You can say almost anything with wisdom. You can even say opposite things on the same issue and say sort of like very vaguely, very kind of like in a hokey way, wise. You can say, you can say something about how you need, someone's impatient. You can say that some kind of like Aesopian thing about waiting for your just desserts, and if someone's like lazy and actually leaves things for too long, you can probably cite the same source and say something about how you need to act on time, blah blah blah, and you can sound wise while saying diametrically opposite things. It's kind of insulting.
It is, and I find certainly in Doctor Who, where that derives from is that there is this sense of insularity about it, as though it could do no wrong. It doesn't matter what it throws out, it can do no wrong, and that derives from the writing. Ultimately, there's a kind of arrogance behind it sometimes, I find, where there's not enough in the way of concern when whoever sits down to write it does so.
It's a problem with characters like the Doctor, or Picard has the same issue, where they're set up in the universe as maybe not completely, but as close as possible to being beyond repute.
Yeah.
And, obviously it's human writers that then write that character who is, completely beyond repute, who can never be wrong. And, that's going to breed arrogance, like having a character that is just a vehicle for correctness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what I dislike about, not one of many things, but Ayn Rand's fiction. She'll always have that central character who is Ubermensch.
Yeah.
Who's not only just the most intelligent person in the entire universe and the most moral, and also with a six-pack.
The most athletic, the most articulate. It's like they're the whole package, aren't they? It's pathetic. I mean, in Ayn Rand, it actually comes off as pathetic, It's almost self-parodic.
And it functions in lieu of an argument, because if you have a character like that, you don't actually have to justify anything that character says or believes or stands. They're right, and if something they do is questioned, then that other character is necessarily, in narrative terms, making a mistake in questioning them.
Yeah, it's the Aslan syndrome, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Aslan's a perfect example, being literally God.
Literally God, yeah. So
the question is something right because God does it, or is it or is it right prior to God doing it? Or is what's right defined as what God does? And
Yeah.
if God is defined as all good, then it kind of raises a serious question there.
It's a really strange thing, isn't it? It's the type of character archetype where the vehicle in which they occur, the fiction in which they occur, will tell you constantly. They will beat you over the head with, this is the good guy, this is the good guy, this is the absolute good, and then they act in ways that is not. That is evidently not. It's a bizarre tension.
I mean, they'll usually try and like complexify it at some point, but they only kind of go halfway. Like, I'm sure there are episodes of Star Trek where Picard is shown to be wrong in very vague ways, but it never really reduces his moral status in the show. And the same for the Doctor.
The same is definitely true for the Doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the more sincere Time Lord character is the Master. For me, it seems perfectly obvious that given their status, the Master is acting more like a Time Lord than the Doctor is. Because what does it really matter? We've already seen that the Doctor can reset all of reality if he wants to.
Yeah,
He
something's got. Oh, that didn't work. I'll just try it again.
He does it all the time. I mean, even within the modern Doctor Who, the universe has been reset about 5 times now.
There is actually an episode where he's trying to end a conflict, or some situation, and at the end of it, he actually says that that was like his 50th attempt.
Right.
Because his assistant says, "Oh, yeah, I can't believe that worked," and he's like, "Well, it didn't the first 49 times or something,"
right.
Which is just done as like a throwaway line. But actually, the implication there is that you've just gone back and kept doing this.
Right, so it shows
until
you...
it's gone the way that you wanted it to.
So it shows you that consequence means nothing in this universe.
Exactly,
I mean, absolutely nothing. So the Master, who is going around just having a whale of a time outside of any constraints of morality or whatever, is the more sincere Time Lord, you know? They're certainly the more divine of the two Time Lords. Because with the Doctor, whenever that character pretends morality, it's exactly that. It's a play. It doesn't mean anything.
I often find the Doctor character to be very sort of like Old Testament God in that, you know, I'm kind and benevolent and lovely as long as you do exactly what I say and agree with me, because otherwise I'll point out, I'll be in no hesitation to point out to you how vastly superior to you that I am.
Exactly.
As soon as you disagree.
Yeah, and very often, even though I say I don't kill or whatever, I will engineer situations such that you do die.
I'm not going to kill anybody, but I'll engineer it so that everyone else does it for me, which Davros actually calls him on one of the David Tennant episodes.
Yes, I mean, for me...
Davros calls him on that shit.
Yeah, he does. I mean, for me, that's when the writing is at its strongest, when it actually tries to puncture the saintly myth of the Doctor, you know?
Yeah, I like Davros says something really good, like, oh, his hands are clean of blood because he gets everyone else to hold the knife or something like that. He says something like that.
He says, the man who will never hold a gun but makes other people into his weapons.
That's it, yeah. Yeah,
and it's
he
like
calls him out on that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and he also calls, you know, he shows him his history and he says, look at the genocides, look at the amount of species that have died because of you. Entire timelines have been erased because of you. And
I like the fact that the David Tennant version of the Doctor seemed aware of that.
Yeah.
I did like that he actually says to someone at one point, if you look at genocide in the dictionary, there's a picture of me, so you do not think that I don't know what I'm talking about with this. You know, he's quite willing to own that shit. But the further away that they go from... Because I think what it was is that Russell T Davies kind of reinvented this character with a very specific view of what he was going to do. Let's take this character who had become almost sort of sanctified.
Yeah.
And let's give him some... You bring him back as Christopher Eccleston, who I maintain was brilliant.
Yeah, I liked Eccleston.
This character has got severe PTSD.
Yeah.
And the first episode, this guy who previously would have, you know, run rings around the earth to save a single life, is now like, oh, I don't give a crap about Mickey. That's just some random idiot. I'm trying to do something bigger here. And he's like... And then on the second episode, a villain, Cassandra, the skin lady, pisses him off, and he just stands there and watches her die. And Rose begs him to help her, and he's like, nah. Yeah. And you think, as someone who was familiar with Doctor Who from the old days, you watch this and you think, what has happened to him?
Yeah.
Why is he like this? And then you learn what's happened to him, and you think, Christ, he's fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
He's really messed up in the head. This is he's slaughtered his entire race and another race in one fell swoop, and it's just messed him up royally. But then the next writer comes along, who's Stephen Moffat, who is another one of them who always likes everyone to think he's really clever,
but is not. I mean, like, really
and
not.
he basically just undoes all of that. He says the Time War didn't actually end that way at all, which means he can ignore all of that trauma, all of that depth, all of that gravity and complication you've given to this character. He just sweeps that away in one moment, and then from then onwards, the Doctor's back to being, I'm always right, I'm always perfect, everything I do is fine. And it's just really unfortunate that he went down that route instead of carrying on with what Russell Davies had set up.
He sets the tone right from the start as well, Moffat, so in the very first episode, he beats the antagonist by just telling the antagonist that he is the Doctor, which immediately frightens the antagonist off the planet.
Right.
So the whole way that he wins there is just by being the Doctor.
Yeah.
There is nothing else.
I hate
and that really
it.
sets up the whole tone for the Matt Smith years. Everything in the Matt Smith years is about how special the Doctor is. I actually quite like Matt Smith as an actor, but I loathe his run as the Doctor. He's very poorly cast in it, and then he's just terribly written all the way through. It's a shame with Moffat because I have a soft spot for Coupling, which probably hasn't aged very well, but I used to like the comedy. And I like some of his early writing for the Russell T Davies period, where he writes individual episodes.
When he does individual episodes, he's not too bad at all, actually.
Yeah.
But all of
when he's not the showrunner, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that Dracula he did.
Oh, God. Yeah,
I was just my head was spinning with how bad it was. I just immediately went on Twitter and I think I complained in like a 5-tweet rant. Just like, and of course, the fact that the first two episodes, I mean, the first episode is fine, the second episode is so-so, and the third episode is just like something out of like a different universe.
Right, it doesn't so much as jump the shark as like leave the atmosphere. You know, it's some other thing, isn't it?
Do you know what it reminded me of? It's like there were 2 episodes of this drama, and then there was a competition for people to write the 3rd episode. And that's the one that won. And it's some amateur writer who's still at university who thinks that they're great and clever and is going to do something different with it. And kind of force some modern values into it and make it something that it's not meant to be. Yeah. And that's what it felt like to me. It was just so... You know when you go back to the planner and you think, have I missed an episode here?
Yeah.
Because I could have sworn this doesn't immediately follow on. But also, that Dracula suffered from that thing of the character of Dracula in particular feeling like he knows that he's in a modern adaptation of Dracula.
Yeah, like
rather
even
than just being Dracula.
In the first episode, his modes of speech and the way he reacts are like a postmodern cartoon character.
Yep, he is. Yeah,
you know,
he seems like someone who knows he's in a Dracula.
Yeah, he knows he's in like that story. You know, it's
you know like how Deadpool is aware that he's a comic book character.
Yeah,
it's like that. But
very
he's not talking to the camera. It's basically the same thing. It's like he knows that he's Dracula and Dracula's a pop culture icon and that this is the latest version of that and he's got to go blur occasionally and that, you know, he's like he knows that and it just doesn't work.
Very much so. And it's tragically bad.
There's a line where a lawyer comes in to rescue Dracula from the corporate group that has him. And it's just like the most weird thing ever because he cites like human rights law in order to get Dracula out of this corporate prison. And authorially, I'm just really confused what's going on. Like, are the writers like, haha, we'll show those libs and their belief in human rights? What if Dracula came back and you weren't able to hit in prison because of the liberal human rights? I'm sure that's not what was going on, but it just felt like, what's the point of this? Like, what are they saying in this scene? And that played the whole thing. I mean, I can't believe that the show writers, I can't remember the name of the character. Oh, of course, it's the same name from the book, but I still can't remember the young mixed race girl who Dracula variously torments and then ends
Oh,
horribly.
Mina Murray.
And I can't believe that the writers hate that character as much as the show seems to. That character as much as the show
Right.
seems, because like the degree of torture that's inflicted on that character and the moralism around that torture is shocking.
Yeah.
From beginning to end. And yet you at the same time get the sense that he somehow offers his ultimate redemption, which, by the way, like, the whole reason he's afraid of crucifixes and stuff is just one of the most disappointing piece of this whole thing. Unbelievable. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
There was, I mean, I remember watching it in that sense of I can't actually believe what I'm watching.
yeah.
Yes.
I can't believe someone didn't sit down and say, take it away and redraft it at least another 12 times and then bring it back to me.
I mean, the way that the vampire hunter is continued on through her relative, who just looks absolutely identical to the original person. That's just like, it's the most contrived nonsense.
Yeah.
And yeah, that show just didn't take itself seriously, let alone its audience.
Right, yeah. It's the insult to the audience, isn't it? That is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
And again, it's that overarching sense that you always get from Moffat projects when he's in charge, that he feels as though he's doing something really clever that's much cleverer than his audience are.
Yeah, you get that with Sherlock all the time.
Oh,
Sherlock
God,
series.
I hate that show. I mean, I know people like it, and I'm sure we'll probably get shit for this, but I hate that show so much.
It's just not very well written. The dialogue is really clunky all the way through. And like all that stuff in season 1 about him being a sociopath, because I know a lot of people say it gets bad, but like that's just a really boring way of analyzing the Sherlock character.
Also he keeps saying it. He keeps saying that he's a sociopath. Ipso facto, if you say you're a sociopath, you're not.
Yeah,
you're just not. First of all, no psychologist has used the term sociopath since the 1960s. It's not a legitimate classification anymore for any kind of condition. Second of all, if you can ascribe yourself as being a sociopath, you're not.
Yeah, by definition.
By definition.
We've gone right back to M. Night Shyamalan and like his problems. It's exactly the same stuff. It's an incredibly egoistic writer-director who cannot separate himself from his work.
Yeah.
And maybe the reason why Coupling, I mean, I haven't watched it recently, so maybe it's worse than I remember. But maybe if it isn't, the reason why is because he was younger and therefore less self-assured and therefore less willing to put all of his ego into it. And then similarly with writing individual episodes of Doctor Who, there wasn't the scope for him to completely imprint himself on everything that he did.
Yeah, so if someone is reining him in, then you get decent writing. But the minute he has control, that's it. I mean, did you ever see the execrable Jekyll?
Yes, yeah. That was incredibly weird.
I was out after the first episode. I was like...
It felt like an ITV kids show, like what we'd have watched around the time that Goosebumps was out.
Yeah.
It felt like... And if it would have been that, it would have been forgivable.
Yeah.
But the fact that this was pitched as an adult drama was just odd.
Well, I remember in the first couple of episodes, you've got multiple contradictory explanations for why he is the way he is.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
No,
go on.
Do you remember
the final explanation? The final explanation of so you don't remember what he was primarily motivated by, and it's such a Moffat reveal. So this is the reason why anyone would be the most dangerous force in the world, and that's explicitly how it's framed.
Right.
He's motivated by love. That's the final explanation.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no other explanation. There's nothing in addition to that.
Okie dokie.
somehow the combination of the drugs he took and the fact that he has people he loves, that's it. Like
That
it's
doesn't.
just, it's not even coherent.
No.
Do you remember the scene? I think it's towards the end where an episode is introduced with like this crack soldier being both trained and then going through various missions, and it sort of bigs him up about how like he's a super soldier, he's never failed a mission, he's like the most powerful soldier that's ever existed, and then he comes and fights Hyde and instantly dies. That's just like the whole mentality of Moffat to his main character, who he always seems to have like a slight infatuation towards. It's just about like enlarging and enlarging and enlarging this one character,
Right.
and at the same time diminishing the whole of the rest of the world. And I think that's why his worlds always feel small. Like, I think his Moffat world feels very paper thin and very cardboard cutout. The Sherlock world feels like it's just, you could almost believe that this is a man in a coma who's actually just a solipsist inventing everything around him.
Yeah.
Because it's like one person's fantasy universe where everything just centers on him completely. You almost can't imagine any of these people existing without Sherlock.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, that even works in terms of the completely spurious logic that he applies to the world, you know? The way he derives, like, very clear, concise extrapolations from redundant details in the universe around him that actually, in any real world, can be interpreted in any one of a million different ways.
I noticed that the loops on your shoes weren't tied the same size, which told me you had broccoli for lunch.
Right.
You know, and you think, well, whoa, let's go back. Hold on. Let's just...
Where do you derive that from?
It's right because Sherlock said it, and he's always right.
And you know,
Do you know what I mean?
towards
That's
the
basically
end,
it.
towards the end of the show, it doesn't even pretend anymore. You even get explanations which are just that, oh, I'm Sherlock Holmes, deal with it, you know. And it's like, no, fuck you, you know.
He's almost like a supernatural force by that point. Yeah.
It turns Sherlock Holmes into an X-Man.
This is this like weird notion of intelligence, where intelligence is an ability to sort of see almost occultically through reality.
Right.
I mean, I've seen that like abandoned in shows before because it doesn't work. I think first season Hannibal does it with Will Graham, and then really decides that that didn't work and that it's not going to do that anymore. So in the first season, there's this weird stuff about Will Graham being some kind of like half autistic and half sociopath, which is a bizarre notion in and of itself. Like that's not a thing. Like obviously sociopathy isn't a thing, but like and that gives him some like supernatural ability to immediately get into the mind of whoever he's investigating, and just work his way backwards from that. Like he has some kind of super empathy. And there's these really bad, almost CGI scenes where he almost goes into a different reality as he's uncoding these crimes. Sherlock does that in an even more embarrassing way with lots of like flashy numbers and graphs. And I mean, these scenes must have been terrible to record, but like Benedict Cumberbatch will start like wiping the numbers away and then bring new ones up, like he's got some VR screen in front of him. But like this is really weird. It's hyper elitist idea of how intelligence works. And it's a very essentialist idea of how intelligence works. And it's so estranged from anything any actual person knows in the world. I don't know how people don't just laugh at it, but somehow it is a popular notion. Like it keeps getting replayed. In Sherlock, as much as everyone now at least claims to hate the later seasons, like it did quite well in terms of...
Sherlock was huge. It was enormous. I mean, it certainly like launched Benedict Cumberbatch's career like into the stratosphere.
I have a lot of like complicated thoughts on Cumberbatch.
I mean, like the latter season of Sherlock is execrable. Like from season 3 onward. I mean, I don't like the previous seasons, but from like season 3 onward, it is just bad. You know, there's nothing good about it at all.
I don't hate the guy who plays Moriarty, except that it's the worst Moriarty
Yes,
ever.
that's it. I mean, I actually really like that actor in a lot of things that he's in. There's an episode of Black Mirror where he's spectacular. He as Moriarty, and it's not him, it's the writing. Again, it's the way he's being written and directed. It is
but again,
the
he's
worst.
one of them. You're told he's the smartest thing ever. You don't see him do anything or act in any way that convinces you of this.
Yeah.
It's just classic Moffat. You're told that he is, so now you have to go with it.
That's it, yes. It's absolutely true. Oh, yeah, it just tragic miscasting. And also, who is directing the actors? Who's not telling, like, when he gives that performance, like, you might want to rein in, like, the queer coding that's going on here a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I will go for that to the nth degree. Like, there's a sequence in the Twilight films, which are universally awful, where Michael Sheen is clearly aware of the fact that he's in a terrible film, and he's also aware of the fact he's the only Oscar-nominated actor around here. And no one's going to tell him no. So he just goes nuts. He just goes nuts. It's the weirdest performance ever. It's like he's stepped off of the set of the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Might as well. This is bad enough, so I might as well just have a laugh with it.
Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, it's great to watch. It's great to watch. The character he plays, Aro of the Volturi, it's just so camp. It's just so phenomenally camp and funny and over the top. Every movement he's got, it's like it's like everything is orgasmic. And he's got these little expressions where he's sort of like, oh, yes. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to watch because it's so out of tone with everything else in the film.
There's performances like that in the Underworld series, I remember, especially Rise of the Lycans, which I vaguely recall actually having quite a few quite big name Shakespearean actors.
Yeah, Bill Nighy's in it. Yeah.
Oh, his vampire in Underworld he's got that weird tick where he sort of does this almost like throat thing and then like pushes his whole head forward.
Yeah.
I really hope he came up with that himself because it's such a fantastically bizarre mannerism.
Given his performances in other sort of similar projects, like he's Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and he has loads of similar tics. So I'm assuming it's a thing that he just does, you know? And it's kind of fun, you know?
Rise of the Lycans is a brilliant movie. It feels like a 70s movie done like much, much later. It's got that like a bunch of like theater thespian types just thrown into the most ridiculous plot line ever. I mean, it is essentially it's kind of a remake of the one with the gladiatorial revolt. I can't remember the name, but
Spartacus
Spartacus.
Spartacus.
It's essentially a Spartacus.
I was going to say Ben-Hur for a
Spartacus,
moment.
But the gladiators are werewolves instead of. That's just it. Like that's the whole plot line.
Great.
It hasn't got like any intellectual element at all. And then it's got all of these Shakespearean actors sort of overacting.
Great.
It's fantastically fun.
I do love to see it. I mean, my earliest memory of that kind of thing was Alan Rickman in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yes.
Terrible film, like absolutely terrible film on almost every level, but Alan Rickman makes it worth it because, again, has realised he's in a terrible film. So just goes for the throat with the pantomime villain thing.
I mean, the films aren't so bad, but the Emperor sort of being hammed up in Star Wars is a very similar thing. Like it's a fantastic performance, just sort of like leading into the mustache twizzling evil of the Emperor.
Ian McDermott just having a blast, just having an absolute blast as the Emperor Palpatine. Yeah.
Well, Frank Langella as Skeletor.
Oh yeah,
he's on record as saying that is the most fun he's ever had in a role.
Oh, he still talks about it.
Because it allowed him to do that.
Yeah, he still talks about it. Whenever he's interviewed, he still talks about doing Masters of the Universe and playing Skeletor.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's a dreadful film, but he is brilliant in it.
He is.
He's
He's
like
fantastic. Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. His performance is just pristine, and he's loving it. He's clearly having so much fun.
Mm. And from Star Trek First Contact, I think the Borg Queen performance does that as well. Alice Cridge, I think it is, and she just like completely owns the evil of that role. Like there's like parts where she's especially when she's acting against the Data character and sort of trying to persuade him to become a sort of android Borg hybrid.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way, that film kind of ruined the Borg, because the whole idea of a Borg queen sort of like robs them of their enigma completely, I think, and that's a problem for the Borg in Voyager. But the performance is wonderful. Like she's having so much fun just being evil.
Yeah. I must admit, it must be a gift when you get that kind of role as an actor and being able to just go for it. It must be so much fun. Just to let rip, with your completely nihilistic side and just be malevolent.
Yeah. There's some anti-hero characters I get the feeling like the actors are going in the same direction with. Like the guy who plays Rorschach in the Watchmen movie, which is the most entertaining part of the Watchmen movie, and otherwise very mixed and strange affair. But like I can't remember his name, but he leans into like just how over the top the character is completely and delivers it actually very like you would imagine from the comic.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I always think of Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate.
Yes.
Just playing Lucifer, playing Satan, and just loving it.
Oh, that end speech which he gets about being a humanist, that's so fantastic.
It's spectacular, that moment. It is absolutely spectacular. The let me tell you a little something about God moment. Love it. And it's quite a good argument, actually, that he makes.
Well, that's the strength of that movie. Like, it stays just within the border of ambiguity, but all the best arguments it gives to Satan. Like, it doesn't actually have anybody say anything persuasively against him at any point in the film.
Nope. There's no argument, is there? There's like no argument from the side of God in that film.
Like the strongest argument the Keanu Reeves character can come up with is that the Bible says that he'll lose.
Right. But then he says, "Consider the source, son."
Yeah, exactly. It's instantly rebuffed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. And Pacino plays it just to the wire. He's loving it. He's loving it.
It's actually, I want to watch that film again. That's
my only problem is that Kevin Lomax makes the wrong choice at the end.
Yes.
He makes the wrong choice.
It's left open because like he then goes back to his previous life, but the devil reappears to him again and again is able to entice him.
Yeah.
And so there's like this sense that like the devil doesn't really care. Like he's in the long game anyway.
In fact, I think that's his line, isn't it? Vanity, definitely my favourite sin.
Also, like it's heavily implied that he's got like hundreds of children. Any of them will do. Like Lomax isn't even that special in the context of the film, which is like it feeds the nihilism of the movie.
Yeah, which is profound.
Yeah. Like there's not even like he's set up as a kind of chosen one figure, somebody who holds this biblical balance, but it's actually revealed he isn't important at all. He's
not
just
really.
Any interchangeable pawns in this metaphysical.
It's one scenario, isn't it? It's one scenario of many, and if that one doesn't work, well, there's plenty of others, isn't it? I like that type. No, go on.
I always find it odd in any kind of apocalyptic sort of film where the devil is the character, and it suggests that like everything that's happened over the last millions of years of humanity all hinge on this one thing.
Right.
And I think, really? He really leaves that much open to chance. This guy might get hit by a bus tomorrow.
Right.
He's waited this long and he's got no backups. He's got no safety net. the idea of, as opposed to, well, this is one thing, but if that don't work, I've got a million others. That seems much more likely.
Right. I mean, like, if you've only got the one Antichrist, what if the guy who plays the Antichrist just says no?
Well, that's Hellboy.
I'm not doing that.
That's Hellboy. That's exactly what Hellboy is. He's someone who, what if the Antichrist is brought through to Earth as a child, raised by a guy who's a good guy, and then as an adult he discovers what his destiny is, and he's like, nah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Suddenly you've got the entirety of biblical prophecy, the entire dynamic of heaven and hell is defeated.
Yeah.
If the Antichrist just says no, just doesn't turn up.
That's exactly what Hellboy is about, which is why I love it, because it's just that idea of adding human will to it, and it just fucks up the plans of these divine beings, because one person's just like, nah.
And that also, it ties in very nicely to the doctrine of free will, doesn't it? It's sort of like, okay, fine, if I've got free will, I'm going to exercise it. No.
Yeah.
It's a more general version of the specific villain problem, which I think is a plot problem of them always having all their eggs in one basket. I mean, I mentioned the Borg Queen. Why would the Borg design themselves in such a way that if one of them dies, all of the collective just immediately becomes dysfunctional and dies? Like a perfect species that has transcended all individuality encode within it such a spectacular weakness.
Right.
It's completely ludicrous that they would do that. Like nothing would do that.
Yes.
And villains always put their eggs in one basket, and it's obviously a Deus Ex Machina, so the hero can neatly win very quickly.
Why would there be a self-destruct button on the Doomsday device? Why would it even exist?
Did you ever play the Simpsons video game, the most recent one? It was actually really good. It was big.
No.
It was all animated, so it looked just like the cartoon, and it had the voice cast on, and it was genuinely funny. But there's a level where you're fighting Kang and Kodos, the aliens.
Yeah, the aliens, yeah.
And they come down in their ship, and they're destroying Springfield, and you've got the characters, and you've got weapons and stuff like Bart and Lisa and whatnot, and you're fighting the ship, and Kang's saying, right, Kang says to Kodos, whichever one it is, what we're going to do is we're going to fire our beam at them, and then we're going to expose the ship's weak spot for 5 seconds, and then put it away again and carry on fighting. And Kodos is like, why do we need to expose the ship's weak spot at all? What is the actual point of that? And he's like, look, have you invaded the Earth before? Because I have, so don't tell me how we're doing this, right? And he's like, and it's just such brilliant bit of self-referential video game humor. That, why does the ship need a weak spot that we're going to expose?
Why does the boss have a great big glowing shoot me spot? Yeah, that's a video game thing, isn't it? That is such a video game thing. And why do they expose it? Why do they not just keep the protective shell around it?
Yeah. That's very much a thing, though. Like the Death Star just having this point where they much effort into it.
Right, yeah. Guys, I think we should continue this in a part 2, if that's okay.
Yeah,
because I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot to chat about here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you both so much. That was an absolute blast and much needed. Rowan, do you have anywhere where people can find you?
Yeah, Twitter, RT_editing. My pinned tweet has my website, Patreon, and various other stuff, my blog, etc. So you can sort of find it all there.
All linked below, by the way, ladies and gents. Check out the description area. Lex?
I'm on Twitter under @LexHJones, and all my books and stuff are on Amazon if you search for Lex H. Jones as well.
Excellent. As for me, same as usual, guys, you can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy, doing another bloody Bloodborne playthrough. I never intended that, but that is happening now. I only intended to do a few videos to celebrate its 6th anniversary. That's not happening. It's the whole game or nothing. You can also find links to all of my published fiction on strangeplaygrounds.com. And if you fancy chatting, come and hit me up at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. Thank you guys so much. It was a blast. We will be back, I think, in a part 2 for this one, because I think there's a lot more to discuss there. And thank you guys at home for listening.